Just fucking, once you get on them, just open them up.
Again, Roger. I see your element. You got about 4 Humvees out along this.
You're clear.
Alright, firing.
Line here. When the stage line, let me know when you have it.
We'll shoot. Light them all up.
002 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire.
Hey, Roger.
Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Bushmaster 2-6, Bushmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
Alright, we just engaged all 8 individuals.
Yeah, we got 2 birds. We're still firing.
Roger.
Got him.
6, this is 2-6. We'll move, but we got 13.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was
bypass.
God damn it, Kyle.
Alright. I hit him. Alright, you're clear.
Alright, I'm just trying to find targets again.
Bushmaster 6, this is Bushmaster 2-6.
Got a bunch of bodies laying there.
Alright, we got about 8 individuals.
Yeah, we got 1 guy crawling around down there, but yeah, we definitely got some. We're shooting some more.
Roger. Hey, you shoot, I'll talk. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18. The Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards.
Nice. 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Thank you, Spear 02 in flight. Free change zone 4 this time. Spear 02, free change.
Nice. Good shoot.
Thank you.
There's 1 guy moving down there, but he's wounded.
To the south.
Alright, we'll let them know so they can hurry up, get over here.
This is 18. We also have 1 individual, appears to be wounded, trying to crawl away.
Roger, we're going to move down there.
Roger, we'll cease fire.
Yeah, we won't shoot anymore.
He's getting up.
If he has a weapon though in his hand?
No, I haven't seen one yet. We'll see.
You guys got that guy crawling right now on the curb?
Yeah, I got him. I put 2 rounds near him, and you guys are shooting over there too, so we'll see.
Yeah, roger that.
Bushmaster 36 element, this is Hotel 27, over. Hotel 27, Bushmaster 7, go ahead.
Roger, I'm just trying to make sure that you guys have my turb over.
Roger, we got the turb.
Come on, buddy.
All I gotta do is pick up a weapon.
Crazy Horse is Bushmaster 5, or Bushmaster 4, break.
Crazy Horse 18, request permission to engage individual.
Picking up the wounded.
Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let us shoot.
A Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 18.
We're taking him.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 18.
This is Bushmaster 7, go ahead.
Roger, we have a black SUV or bongo truck picking up the bodies. Request permission to engage.
This is Bushmaster 7, Roger. This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage.
18, engage. Clear.
Come on.
Clear. Clear.
We're engaged.
Coming around, clear.
Roger. Trying to,
Clear.
Roger, I lost him in the dust.
I got him.
I'm firing.
George, this is Bushmaster 4, you got any BDA on that truck, over?
You're clear. This is Crazy Horse standby. Should have a van in the middle of the road with about 12 to 15 bodies.
Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
Alright, there was approximately 4 to 5 individuals in that truck, so I'm counting about 12 to 15. Roger, we'll be standing by here. Yes, Viper, 5 departing zone 208 for zone 4. We call frequency.
I just drove over a body. Yeah.
Viper 5-2, report free change zone 4. Aggressive 20, Commando 89ers active, Port Arrival 311. 20.
Magnet radio, aggressive 34 is off zone 208 for zone 1. We'll call for change.
Aggressive 4-3, zone, correction, aggressive 3-4, zone 30 is closed, report free change zone 1.
Aggressive 3-4, welcome.
Roger.
Roger, that's a negative on evac and the two civilian kids to Russia. They're going to have the IPs link up with us over here, break. And IPs will take them up to a local hospital, over. Up your copy, over.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle.
That's right. Crazy Horse 1A will be setting up north to south, engaging with Hellfire. Roger. Break. Crazy Horse 1A, request permission to engage.
I'm picking up the wounded.
Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let us shoot.
A Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A.
We're taking him.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A.
Okay, I got it.
Last calling station, Hotel 26.
Hotel 26, you want your hotel CC element?
And a black vehicle on our target, right to the north of the mosque.
Yeah, I would like that, over.
And Hotel, Crazy Horse 1A. Moving south by the Mosque Dome on that road.
Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards.
Welcome to the Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on the Independent Review.
Welcome to the Independent Review. We have a great show today with clips from Cristian, Whitney, Webb with Maddie, Bannon, Scott Armstrong with Charlie Robinson, Kim Iverson, James Corbett, and Eva Bartlett. Let's go to the first clip with Whitney and Maddie discussing Robert Calif and his role with the FDA.
Rheumatoid arthritis and things like that.
Yeah, so one of the companies pursuing neuromodulation of that particular nerve you mentioned, I guess the splenic nerve, is for rheumatoid arthritis is Galvani Bioelectronics, which is an interesting company in the context of Robert Calif because it's a joint venture of GlaxoSmithKline and Verily, which is Google's health subsidiary that Robert Calif has been involved with over the years. And they're one of the ones that sort of got this I think they've already started implanting it into people, but they have a lot of ambitions for these neuromodulation devices, which is basically to alter how the nervous system functions, whether it's targeting specific nerves or many nerves or groups of nerves or the entire brain. That's sort of the whole ambition there. And of course, Verily is also the people behind Project Baseline, which is something that you mentioned earlier. And I think not enough people have paid attention to this, and it's a really crazy thing when you think about it. So, there's a few things that have been written on Baseline, from mainstream sources. One summary offered here in which you sort of have touched on already in what you've talked about. It says, the Verily Baseline Health Study launched in 2017. So that's around the same time that Calif was at Google and being their top health strategist, right? It was launched in 2017 with the goal of mapping human health by collecting data from a variety of sources, including self-reported data, smartphone or wearable recorded data, or through electronic health records. And as you mentioned earlier, because of the Cures Act, some of that recorded data by smartphone or wearables, that data can be obtained without informed consent. Anyway, so it says, essentially, a lot of this Baseline Health study and the broader Baseline Health platform is all about changing, again, how clinical trials function, right? So I first heard about Project Baseline during the COVID stuff because they were using it specifically for that. And a bunch of weird stuff was going on with Verily and COVID tests, including having people, forcing people who took COVID-19 tests in the San Francisco area, which were being managed. I think the government there had contracted Google or Verily to do this, and they were requiring people that got COVID tests to basically link their test results to their Google account. And if they didn't have a Google account, they had to make one in order to participate, which is pretty insane. But essentially what it sounds like to me is that Project Baseline is just trying to gather an insane amount of data on people for all different types of purposes. And essentially the goal, they say, is to collect comprehensive health information with the goal of better understanding health in the transition to disease. And it's important to keep in mind that at the same time this has been going on, and when this was launched, is when the Pentagon and Google teamed up for this sort of predictive healthcare thing. So basically, using all of this data, all of these, this massive cache that the military holds from like the veteran and military health systems of X-ray images and things like that to train AI so that the AI could offer predictive cancer diagnoses. So basically the AI is like, oh, well, we've decided that you'll develop cancer in 5 years, but you don't actually have cancer. So it's all of this sort of, what me and people like Ryan Cristian have sort of referred to as the pre-crime paradigm applied to healthcare. So basically you're going to be told that you're going to develop this disease by AI or some of these different devices or by, this data accumulation, and they're going to decide, they're going to tell you what you're likely to develop before you develop it, and then go and offer you all these different weird therapeutics, whether it's stuff like, mRNA stuff or gene therapy or, these neuromodulation devices or wearables or stuff that interacts, with your nervous system or changes how it functions and all sorts of stuff. Even though at that particular moment you don't actually need it, it's being framed as preventative, right? And this is, again, Google with the military doing this, and you have them, of course, doing it in all their sorts of different guises. But ultimately, it's about healthcare, right? But it seems to be a lot more than that, if you ask me. But,
Yeah, and Calif, in an interview, he mentions that this sort of, subtle influence over people in regards to their health is, justifiable because it's already happening, and it's been happening for a while through, private market advertisements and cookies on your computer and tracking what you buy and figuring out what you might be interested in buying and then presenting that to you. So he's just, and he thinks that doing that isn't necessarily good. It's not getting people things that they need or make them have a happier or healthier life. So what he's saying is, well, that's bad. When we do it, it's good because we're trying to help people live longer and be less ill. So we're going to track you in just the same way. We're going to nudge you and influence you in just the same way. But our ends are delivering those drugs and those medical devices that you need, right? You'll be convinced that you need them because we have all the data, and we'll present to you evidence that we found and tell you how this will help you in your life before you are even considering, going to the doctor about it. So like you said, it is preemptive, and he thinks that it's totally fine. There's good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys are the people who sell you clothes and food and stuff like that. But they're good because they sell you pharmaceutical drugs and medical devices.
Yeah, crazy. So, so in your particular article, in talking about the Cures Act, you sort of mentioned that Calif had a role in getting that certain aspects of that legislation, in place, involved to an extent in the drafting and lobbying process for this particular law. And so I found it interesting too that rolled within that act were things like the BRAIN initiative and Biden's Cancer Moonshot initiative, which was basically the basis for Biden's recent creation of ARPA-H, which was previously shopped around to the Trump administration under the name of HARPA, or basically a health-focused DARPA equivalent. And I actually did a podcast a few months ago about one of the guys behind the BRAIN initiative and how he has been very active where I live down in South America in Chile, and getting Chile to be the first country to establish what are called neuro rights. This idea of trying to protect your individuality and sort of this paradigm where brain machine interfaces and all of this are very common. And essentially, what I sort of talked about this likely being in that particular podcast, instead of it being framed as protecting you from all the bad stuff these devices could do to you, making you lose your sense of self, among other things, is really about creating the necessary framework and public justifications to get these types of devices on the market, not necessarily for healthcare related purposes, but also for commercial purposes. Because people like Elon Musk at like Neuralink and stuff, on one hand, they're saying, and I guess Synchron too, probably, and some of these other firms doing the same thing. On one hand, they're framing this as, this is a health device to help people that are paralyzed walk and blind people see and all of that. But at the same time, Elon Musk is like pretty open that Neuralink is intended to be like used for commercial purposes. People could use it to play video games and stuff. And, even some of the animal trials they promoted were like monkeys with the Neuralink implant playing video games with their brain and stuff, not paralyzed monkeys walking again. You know what I mean? So it just seems, a bit different than it's being sold.
Sure. I think, for the brain computer interfaces, the only, there's a difference between imagination and reality. And you can, postulate and say that our BCI is going to help people walk or see or whatever. I don't see any evidence of that, at least as far as the initial, studies and footage and things like that there's no evidence for that actually happening. As far as what is able to be accomplished is that you can control, so if you're if you're 100% paraplegic and you have no way to move your hands or interface with the computer, you can do so, they say, quote unquote, simply by thinking. And while that may have medical application, if you're trying to help people who are paralyzed, sure, but why can't anybody else use it for that? So it's just to pass it under the guise and get these sort of fast tracks to market, seemingly to preempt your competition and kind of monopolize that market as soon as you can, which is, I would say, Synchron is definitely much further ahead than anybody else on that front. That seems to be what it's actually for, because I don't, the brain computer interfaces, there's just not enough evidence out there to suggest that it's actually going to help people with their claims of the irreversibly debilitating diseases or the life-threatening diseases. There is one company. It's called let's see. I think it's called like Neuralinks or Neuraleaf. That's what it is. They have this brain computer interface that links with an exoskeleton that helps people who have had a stroke move the hand that's not working anymore. That makes more sense. But yeah, it seems more just to try to get these things on the market as quickly as possible under the guise of helping people, as is,
Yeah. And what I mentioned earlier, there's this whole, ulterior motive coming from the highest levels of the national security state and people like Eric Schmidt trying to get this stuff out there on the market as quickly as possible because they see it as part of this big tech war with China, right? Which is also pretty crazy. And, a key point I want to make here too. So I'm sure people are familiar with, my analysis and other people's analysis of statements made by people tied up with the World Economic Forum and big, 4IR evangelists like Yuval Noah Harari, who basically say that like the whole wearable paradigm, like getting wearables on everybody is the red line, that will, result in the ushering in of what he calls digital dictatorships. Basically the surveillance of what's going on, not just inside your body, but inside your mind. And I think this is all kind of interesting when you're looking at the big players here in the context of, a lot of how this mass surveillance is also, tied into this effort to launch a war on domestic terror, and mass surveil everybody and sort of usher in the paradigm they tried to do after 9/11 with things like DARPA's total information awareness and stuff. So, you have groups like Google and also Palantir, which is basically, as I've noted in my work, essentially a CIA front that is basically total information awareness privatized. And so Palantir, basically has access and has been running a lot of the COVID-19 health data and other health data held by HHS. And also in the United Kingdom, basically all NHS data is being managed by Palantir as well. And then you have Google having this big, role. For example, they host the FDA's My Studies program and on Google Cloud, and they have for some time. And you have a lot of these, this revolving door, like we talked about earlier, sort of between the regulatory agencies and Google, and Verily is being used for a lot of these new remote trials to get some of these, more novel devices, I guess, and like neuromodulation devices on the market more quickly without, in-person monitoring and, a completely electronically conducted, fully remote clinical trials. So, and they're teamed up with the Pentagon. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on here. And I think some of that overlap is interesting in the context of this whole, misinformation, trying to, stop people from spreading what's deemed as misinformation about health, and how that also is, one of the main objectives of this supposed war on domestic terror. Because Robert Calif has been very vocal, since he came into this position last year about, the need for the FDA as an agency to preempt and debunk misinformation, which is kind of ironic because some of their efforts on that, front have actually involved the FDA spreading the misinformation. For example, claiming that, ivermectin is not able to be used in human beings, that it's like a horse and cow medicine exclusively. And regardless of what you think about its validity as an early treatment of COVID or whatever, well before the COVID era, it was being used in people. So to frame it as, a horse dewormer exclusively, like had been done on CNN, is not accurate. And the FDA, obviously knows this. So, it's just interesting that you'd have, Google, Palantir, they're big players in the healthcare system, getting more and more tied up, with the FDA, and they're a big part of this misinformation crackdown and profiling of people spreading misinformation as well. And I think people, might want to see that there's that degree of overlap there, because once you're surveilling people, whether it's under the guise of healthcare or under the guise of stopping domestic terrorism, I mean, ultimately, I think the end result, is the same essentially. And I've also kind of argued in some of my work on the creation of ARPA-H under the Biden administration, which sort of goes back to this Cures Act stuff you were talking about during the Obama administration. I mean, essentially, that's also about getting the mass use of wearables for this, predictive health paradigm and precision health paradigm and all of this stuff. So, maybe it's being framed as, a boon for public health, but ultimately it seems to me like the 4IR is just about an insane paradigm of mass surveillance, and they're just trying to see what sort of justifications they can make for it, what sticks and what people, need to believe and need to feel in order to start using that type of technology on and in their bodies.
Yeah, I think that the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Klaus Schwab and, the people who are his true believers, they describe it as the merging of our personal and digital selves, right? Or quantified selves. but it's really about the last frontier, which is the mind.
Right.
And also including genetics. So they're looking to somehow be able to predict, and they've been, the U.S. government, at least for a long time, has been created artificial models of the world, and tried to use that to predict how military conflicts would go, or certain release of information would go. They created computer generated models of the world and people to the finest detail possible, hoping that they could predict the future. Really, they need a comprehensive understanding of how people think. And I think that's really what it's about. The mind is really the last frontier, and genetics, for capitalism and government and surveillance and control. So that seems to be the primary target, by merging people's, physical and digital selves. And while, they frame it as that's something that will happen eventually and inevitably, the private market and the public-private market are kind of already doing that intentionally. So they're, whether or not that would have happened otherwise is another question, but they're kind of making that happen now.
Next, let's go to Scott Armstrong from Rebunked with Charlie Robinson on the impending CBDCs.
How these things happen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's funny too, I think, as we all kind of know, like just economics in general, banking, it's intentionally very confusing. Like it's not readily available to most people, it gets very, very murky very quick. And it is like, I still don't know shit about money, dude. I'm just like figuring it out. Like they never taught us any of this stuff. I don't know, dude. Like I'm just, I'm trying to figure it out as I get older. But anyway, it's so interesting because like right now we're living in an era where now all of it is evolving. The whole narrative, all the drama is moving closer and closer towards the banks as kind of the crux of the thing. And it's starting to reveal itself as maybe this is the groundwork that's been laid this whole time. Like I just heard a really good interview that Cristian from Last American Vagabond just had with Catherine Austin Fitts.
I watched it. Yeah.
So she was talking about basically, how it's just a series of consolidation moves, whereas COVID, you see, well, not only that, so COVID was kind of a two-way thing where, you can print all this money, all these COVID relief packages, all these things that are being handed out. But kind of like what you were saying, the money is being handed out to their cronies to build the control infrastructure. So all that money went to build out the control infrastructure. But at the same time, it was utilized to decimate small businesses. So that first round, the COVID, the lockdowns, all of the handouts, it was to decimate small businesses. She was saying particularly in the district where Silicon Valley Bank was located, like a lot of their loan portfolio was small businesses that got wiped out, right? So there's interesting how that, but it's like these Democrat-run states and cities, like interesting overlap there. But also, so what we're seeing is the consolidation of business, those who are World Economic Forum partners, people that are, willing to play ball. You saw that round during COVID, but now what we're starting to see is now the smaller banks are going to start to get wiped out as that phase of the consolidation continues. So it's all driving towards something that is all steered centrally around the US dollar. But it's really interesting too, because now you've got like BRICS and all these other competing financial systems popping up around the world, which has always been the United States' strength. It's like, that's what we exist for. We have the world reserve currency, and you don't mess with that. Now that that's being threatened, it's almost like you see like the rats leaving the sinking ship, or just trying to capitalize with the last little bit as the system's still there. But I know there's a million things we can go with in there, but I think, because you have like some financial background, and I know that you probably keeping a close eye on this banking situation. But what are your thoughts, like in the immediate future, about what we're seeing in terms of that, and just whatever you think about that?
I like that Catherine Austin Fitts described the Silicon Valley Bank as a execution. That it was like that that was intentional, and that it spooks the traditional bank customers, deposit holders, into saying small and medium-sized banks are at risk. Where do I go with my money? Then you have Janet Yellen at the Treasury being asked a question about who do you decide to protect and save in these banking crises? Is it, should the small and medium-sized banks expect that? And her answer was, we protect the ones that are systemically important. So you go, okay, I know what that means. That means the big ones. Yeah. So between thinking that small and medium-sized banks are on the verge of collapsing, and then hearing from the Treasury Secretary that we're only going to save the most important ones, and putting two and two together, you say, well, I had to move my money to the big banks then. The reckless banks that are too big to fail. They're drunk at the craps table at 3 a.m, but they don't care because they know that if they go down, they take all the other big banks with them because of their derivative books. So they can't go down. And if they do, they will get bailed out. So their negative behavior will be positively reinforced by the fact that the Treasury and the Fed will come to bail them out. Yeah. So that creates a bank run, not out of the system, but just from small and medium-sized banks to big banks. And then they've got you. Then you're trapped because those big banks are the ones that can very easily be the lead drivers on the central bank digital currency. And I would suggest that they will be, along with the Fed. And that is, in my opinion, a hill to die on. The central bank digital currencies. We under no circumstances can allow that to be normalized, to take hold. I've read something recently that the Fed is going to roll it out in like 2 months. No, Jesus. Absolutely not. No. I would like to remind people before we get too black-pilled with the idea of central bank digital currencies being a foregone conclusion, that they rolled them out in Nigeria and the Nigerians just completely ignored them. Yeah. They only 0.5% of the people in Nigeria are transacting with the Nigerian version of their central bank digital currency. 35%, I think, of Nigeria transacts in Bitcoin. So they just have voted with their dollars or their whatever their currency is to say we're not doing that. So think of, and we mentioned, the small and medium-sized businesses. Now we're not talking about banks. We're talking about the businesses getting decimated during COVID, and that only the big ones are not only the big ones around, but enough small and medium-sized went away that it's really becoming just big players and a few scattered medium-sized and small-sized businesses. But the big ones that decide to play ball with the World Economic Forum and become partners with them, I can envision a scenario in which this is like the late 1800s company store on the Rockefeller properties, when they're the mining colonies where they're like, we'll pay you in these fake dollars that can only be redeemed at the company store, which they ran, and so it keeps, they get everything, right? Yeah. So I can envision a scenario in which your central bank digital currencies may only work at the company store being all of the companies that are connected to the World Economic Forum, so anything that's approved by them, it works. Or maybe, because it's programmable, there's almost endless ways they can rig it. Yeah. They could say that no, it doesn't work at all anywhere else except at the company store. Or they could say, we'll give you 2-to-1 at the company. Like we could really do the carrot scenario as opposed to the stick and say, we'll give you 2-to-1. You buy twice as much stuff here. And you're like, oh my God, what a great deal. Well, then that just kills the small and medium-sized businesses that were left over. They can't compete. That's an unfair playing field. Yeah. But it doesn't matter because nothing about it will be fair. They can set the currencies to expire. Scott, they had a bad Christmas. The numbers just came out and the Christmas sales were down 16%. We just can't have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to set 40% of the central bank digital currencies that you have in your bank account to expire in the next 90 days. So you better get to spending, and that's how they can be confident in saying things like you'll own nothing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll own nothing because you won't be allowed to save anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because all the money will have an expiration date on it. So just about the time you get enough money to save up for that car, you've got a big batch of it that starts expiring on you. And so you'll have to be forced into a rent situation. And guess who are members of the World Economic Forum? Uber and Lyft. I mean, what a surprise, right? So you've got these groups the CEOs of both of those organizations are World Economic Forum young global leaders. So they've already planted the seeds all over the place for this own nothing society. But the CBDC is central to that. If they can get that to work the way they want it to, the way they envision it, and you can even look at the head banker at the BIS, the Augustus, the big fat guy, and hear him on video saying the thing about central bank digital currencies is that we would have total control. Yeah. And you're like, oh my God, like I know that and you know that, but like, you're not supposed to say it on camera, man. Like now everybody hears the plan. So it's coming. And it's a real big deal. And again, back to like where we started, which is banking is boring and nobody cares. Well, you're going to care. You're going to care real fast when you can't conduct business with anybody because your money doesn't work because they control it.
Yeah. And it's going to be some sort of problem, reaction, solution situation that they orchestrate, and they've telegraphed it and told us and written about it. You know, it's either going to come in the form of like, you know, some cyber attack, or it's going to be, you know, something that's going to somehow, or the bank runs, right? It's going to be a simple, situation where it's like, oh, I'm sorry, all your money's gone. But we have this thing over here. We'll give you your Fed Now dollars. Just like, here you go. Just like sign here and you'll get all your money recuperated just in this, or a percentage of your money back in the form of this new central bank digital currency, which is then going to opt in everybody to this new system, right? And so, you know, I think the biggest thing, it's going to be like a gut check type of situation, because, you know, if people aren't able to diversify their investments and their wealth in ways that aren't controlled by a bank or in a bank, then they're going to be presented with a pretty much an offer they can't refuse to opt into that system, you know, and then that's going to come with so many other things that are going to require more and more compliance as you go along, just to be able to play that game. And so the gut check is going to come in the form of like, okay, well, let's not play that game. Like, we have to just realize that even with the shot, you know what I mean? Like, these are all just offers that they're going to make us. They're always just offers, and it may seem like it's completely coerced, but no one had a gun to their head. You can still, like, I got, you know, I walked away from a job. I got fired from a job. You know what I mean? Like, I was not willing to go through with that. So I was not willing to accept their offer, and I dealt with the consequences. Right. So It's tough. It's going to be very tough, but I have a lot of hope that even if it does come out, there's going to be so many, probably the majority of people, that will just be like, no, I'm good. Like, we actually have this whole system over here. You know, there's some, you know, to their credit, I would say, like, some communities, well, it's like church communities, even like the Mormons. The Mormons have a very long history of like in-group preference, like just doing economy amongst each other, and not, you know, that's just like stuff like that. So that is like how we are going to actually be able to. So let's say they do it, right? I have a lot of hope. It's like, you know, I'm working really hard to build community here in Tennessee with my new friends I got here in Tennessee, with various different groups that I'm involved in, like liberty kind of centered groups. And I just always have to just really keep saying the value of just building community within your community. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, there's lots of different ways to do that. Like, the Freedom Cells movement has been a huge one for me. Beartaria, the Beartaria Times app is a really great way to meet other local people. You know, let's see, Make Americans Free Again. I was just at a Make Americans Free Again little gathering last night, which is like Pam Popper's thing. And so it's like, what we need to do right now, while things are relatively mild, or we should have been doing this for this whole time, is just build out your network, your community, building trust within that community. And then if anything does happen, it's going to give you more confidence in being able to not opt into whatever this system is that they're going to offer, you know?
For sure. Yeah, I agree. The Amish were right.
Yes, exactly. The Amish. Yeah, see, the Amish
rule.
Exactly. You know,
of course, they'll never see this podcast or hear it, and that's a damn shame.
Next, let's go to this clip from New World Next Week with James Corbett and James Evan Pilato on some updates from this week.
Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. The administration will continue working with agencies to wind down the national emergency. We've got that story, plus the Green King's genetically modified everything. But first, Finland formally joins NATO, doubling the alliance's border with Russia. We take this story from antiwar.com. Finland formally became the 31st member of NATO on Tuesday, officially ending Finland's post-World War II policy of neutrality and, of course, raising tensions between Helsinki and Moscow. Finland has today become a member of the defense alliance NATO. The era of military non-alignment in our history has come to an end. A new era begins, the Finnish presidency said in a statement. The ascension into NATO was completed during a ceremony attended by Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Finland joining NATO more than doubles NATO's territory that borders Russia. Moscow has said it will respond by beefing up its military presence in the region and will take more measures if other NATO countries deploy military assets to Finnish territory. A major motive for Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine was NATO's post-Cold War expansion and the alliance's cooperation with Kiev following the 2014 coup that ousted Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. More on that in a moment. At the ceremony, Blinken appeared to say he was thankful that Putin invaded Ukraine because it motivated Finland to apply for NATO membership. Think about that. I'm tempted to say this is maybe the one thing we can thank Mr. Putin for, because he once again here precipitated something he claims he wants to prevent by Russia's aggression, causing many countries to believe that they have to do more to look out for their own defense and to make sure they can deter possible Russian aggression going forward, Blinken said. Leading up to the invasion of Ukraine, Russia presented a list of security guarantees it wanted from the U.S. Chief among them was a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, but the Biden administration refused to engage on the issue. After the invasion, now over a year old, Derek Chollet, a counselor to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, admitted that the administration made no effort at all to address Putin's concerns about Ukraine's possible NATO membership. Didn't even try. On its birthday, James, the NATO Secretary General says we will welcome Finland as the 31st member of our alliance. So yes, back in the good old days of Obama-Saya and Biden overthrowing countries, Washington was behind Ukraine coup. Obama admits U.S. brokered a deal in support of regime change. February 3rd, 2015, from Global Research. And 4 years ago this week, James, I was just playing the classic episode on my stream. We told you right here on New World Next Week, episode 370, forget creepy, Biden has a major Ukraine problem. April 4th, 2019. James, I love the meme that folks made of you and I when we were hanging out in Japan. If I told you so was a person. James.
Indeed. Well, what can we tell people about this Finland joining NATO? I guess to try to make sense of this story, we could turn to the AFP. But then I guess the question would be, which AFP story should we believe? Because you can go to how Finland joining boosts NATO defenses against Russia, which starts by noting that Finland's membership of NATO adds a potent military to the alliance. Or you could turn to the AFP story, Finland and NATO, strategic shift with limited material gain, which starts by noting that the ascension of Finland to NATO provides the coalition with limited additional military capacity, and then goes on in great detail to talk about how Finland doesn't have much of a military anyway. So what's the bigger point of this? The bigger point of this really is, okay, yes, NATO is expanding. NATO is using the crisis that it helped to generate in order to grow. Wow, big surprise. So Putin was successfully lured into that trap because he's a strategic idiot. But this is just one part of the much, much, much bigger story that I've been screaming my head off about, I've been trying to warn people about for years. It is coming. And so let's expand this picture greatly. What else is going on in the world right now? Taiwan set to start receiving Javelin missiles in 2023. A huge change in the status quo in what has for many years been envisioned as the potential flashpoint of a U.S.-China military war. But it doesn't end there. We can also go to Channel News Asia. China warns Philippine-U.S. base deal endangering regional peace. Yes, Philippines has just cut a deal for 4 additional military bases to be used by U.S. troops in the Philippines, really in the South China Sea. Which puts it right on China's doorstep. But, okay, so what's the counter to all this NATO? Because, of course, yes, NATO is growing and enlarging and using the crisis to grow its power. I wonder if there's a mirror image to this going on. Oh, that's right. Saudi Arabia decides to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, as the clued-in Corbett reporters in the crowd know, of course, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the mirror image of NATO, that they are trying to build up as some sort of counter-NATO. It hasn't really done much to this point, but it is growing, and you will know about that if you remember back to, say, my 2012 report on 2011 report on Meet the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'll throw the link in the show notes in case you need to refamiliarize yourself with that report. But it doesn't end there, because it's not just the military moves that we're seeing on the geopolitical chessboard right now. It's also, of course, the underlying monetary infrastructure of the planet is being rewired right now. The latest examples of that come from, for example, The Hill. Saudi Arabia reportedly considering accepting yuan instead of dollar for oil sales, which, if people have been clued into anything that's been happening the last couple of decades, that's usually a good sign that the bombs are going to start raining very soon. Or you could turn to republicworld.com. India announces trade settlement in rupees with Malaysia, gives blow to dollar hegemony. And it's all, okay, so Saudi Arabia is talking about yuan, the petro yuan, and India is going to interact in rupees. It's almost like there's some sort of coordinated effort going on. Oh, that's right. Kitco has this story. Ditch the dollar movement grows as Moscow calls for the creation of a common BRICS currency. Yay, we're going to fight the globalists by creating another big regional global governmental structure. So State Duma Deputy Chairman Alexander Babikov is encouraging the creation of a new common currency between Russia, India, and the other BRICS nations as a way to push back against the US dollar hegemony. And what form would this take, Mr. Babikov? New Delhi, Moscow should institute a new economic association with a new shared currency, which could be a digital ruble or the Indian rupee. What? A digital ruble? Digital ruble? What are you talking about? The Russians are fighting against the New World Order, man. They're not trying to create it. But the digital ruble is different, say the morons in the crowd, or the bottom paid for shills for the BRICS in the so-called alternative media. Anyway, this is the bigger picture of what's going on right now. Finland joining NATO is one tiny piece of this much bigger puzzle. All signs pointing to, at the very least, Cold War 2.0, but presumably something much bigger. And I have the palpable sense, I've had it for years, I know what it was like to be sitting there in 1910, 1911, 1912, 1913, 1914, watching all of the pieces of these military alliances and economic agreements and everything going into place and going, hey guys, something is coming. They are prepping the chessboard for something. Something's going to happen here. And then an archduke gets assassinated, and suddenly, hey, World War, everybody. So, anyway, I hope people have their eyes on this ball. I'll throw all of those links in the show notes so people can study up if this is news to you. But anyway, just letting you know what's coming.
I was just doing show prep for my tomorrow show for April 6th, and in that day in history, U.S. declares war on Germany in the Great World War Part 1. Other much more recent news I've covered actually just this week on my Morning Monarchy, James. U.S. is sending old Abrams tanks to Ukraine. They'll have pride flags on them, so I'm sure the Democrats will be all on board for it. Meanwhile, far more sinister, the UK is sending depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine. Depleted uranium, chemical weapons, war crime. And I'm sure it's already, I believe, some of the contests have already started. I'm sure NATO's song contest, Eurovision, will probably have something to say about all of these latest moves and grooves, James. We'll move to our second story on this New World Next Week, episode 515, Disbelief as the Green King gives royal assent to new gene breeding technology. We grabbed those from our friends at activistpost.com, and one of the more shocking hypocrisies of this year so far, and it's still a young year. Charles III, the King of England, King Chuck, considered to be a strong supporter of organic farming and environmental causes. We've known this in years past. He would always travel with his own organic chef, while, of course, letting the plebes eat the bugs. King Chuck has given his royal assent to a biotechnology innovation which will provide an open book for UK firms to alter the genome of animals and plants so as to create novel engineered species and biotech foods. In taking this step, King Chuck has committed an open act of betrayal on all bona fide farmers, and particularly organic farmers. The Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act 2023 was given the royal go-ahead on 23rd March 2023. This piece of legislation will, for the time being, be unique to the United Kingdom. As such, animal and plant biotech deformations are not allowed in the EU and many other countries. A secondary deception relates to the marketing of such novel recombinant DNA experiments, if that at all sounds familiar. The UK government has stated no separate definition will be given to gene technology engineered products, therefore no special labeling will be needed. The dark irony of the King of England launching unlabeled biotech foods, animals, and plants on the citizens of his own country is difficult to trump. Charles is already in conflict with the constitution of his country by standing shoulder to shoulder with Klaus in promoting the Great Reset, one of the main objectives of which is to render all nation-states obsolete and to centralize all power with the control of a small despotic elite whose stated intention is to make all private property illegal. You'll own nothing, whether that's renting Adobe Photoshop or Uber or Airbnb. All private property illegal, and to re-engineer human beings into transhuman cyborgs. You may have heard stuff about that in the news lately. Charles will be officially crowned monarch of the United Kingdom and, of course, all its slave crown colonies at his coronation in London on May 6, 2023. It's a Beltane tradition. James, we're right here in the gnarly time of the Ides of March, basically to May 1st, and that's when inbred royal kids like to get married, and they shockingly write out super boogie men, super villains like Bin Laden. So James, this is all coming up very soon.
Crazy, isn't it? And James, it occurs to me that when I'm explaining eugenics to people, I will often say, oh, this is the way that people in the modern scientific era give the justification for why certain people rule over others. It's your genes, man, because we've discarded the old royal idea of, oh, there's some special family that was chosen by God to rule over you or whatever. There's no special people like that anymore. We don't believe in that. But actually, and I often say, it would be so much more comforting if there was that. The person living in the castle on the hill, that's your enemy, guys. Do you understand? Those are the people that are ruling over you. It would be so much easier than in this age where everybody's wearing the same business suit and they all look kind of the same and they talk the same. But no, actually, there still is the guy literally living up in the castle on the hill who literally believes himself to be of better blood than you and a special human being who deserves all of these wonderful fancy privileges. And we can scoff at the things that have been reported ad nauseum about King Charles and his preferences and habits, like how his pajamas are pressed for him every morning, his shoelaces are pressed flat with an iron, the bath plug has to be in a certain position, and the water temperature has to be just tepid, or the cook's scrambling around in the morning making his breakfast, and they have to prepare dozens of eggs, because it has to be just the right consistency, so they'll prepare a number of different eggs, and they'll number them, so that if the prince felt that number 5 was too runny, he could knock off the top off of number 6 or 7. So he could go down the line in order to get just the right consistency of egg. Or we could laugh about how he travels the world with his orthopedic bed, his fresh linen, his radio, a chest of drawers, his personal toilet seat, rolls of Kleenex premium comfort toilet paper, and 2 landscapes of the Scottish Highlands. And understand the type of person that is presuming to rule over the plebs. But, as you pointed out, the real hypocrisy here, at the heart of this particular story anyway, is that yes, no, King Charles doesn't just travel with a personal chef. He has numerous personal chefs who bring his own personal food supply everywhere he travels in the world. He doesn't eat other people's food. He only eats his own organic food, and they make a big deal about this in a lot of the coverage. The prince has often been noted for preferring fresh and organic food, which Carolyn noted as having incredible foresight about, blah, blah, blah. For example, he introduced organic food into all the royal palaces, with a report suggesting he would arrive at Sandringham with armfuls of organic produce from Highgrove. So let me get this straight. King Charles is obsessed and will only eat organic food, almost as if he knows something about the crap that is being shoveled down the gullets of the trusting plebes. It's almost like he knows something about this, and he wouldn't do it himself, but hey guys, good enough for you. Not for me, for you guys out there. This is the person who's launching the Great Reset on the world, and literally, it was King Prince Charles who literally launched the Great Reset at the original Great Reset launch back in 2020 or whenever that was. This is the man who is doing this and who is now giving his royal assent, his, yes, good for the plebs, gene-edited food, whatever bio-produced, lab-produced crap you want to foist on the hoi polloi, that's fine. But I'm going to travel with my special personal chef with my own personal organic ingredients. So keep that in mind, everybody. This is the type of person who's doing it to you. And this is the absolute extreme of that. But this is the mentality of the eugenicists who are seeking to rule over you. So, hey, in this case, maybe we should be more like King Charles. Organic food, specially prepared. Don't trust the crap that they are feeding you from the supermarkets. Maybe we should all be a little bit more like the king in this case.
Yeah, do you think he's having Impossible Burgers and plant-made bug cakes? Absolutely not. I certainly hadn't heard a bit of those stories. It almost sounds like he's an OCD nutball. James, I can't help but think of, there's a show on NBC several years ago called 30 Rock that I find really kind of prescient and telling. They basically did it under the cover of the Obama years with jokes and blackface and things that they would never do now. They have an episode where some weird, played by Paul Rubens, some basically inbred royal king is at some party and he's like a little puppet. And he's literally just like a ventriloquist doll that they kind of put Pee Wee Herman's head on. That's basically what I think of these people. I will include the link, Coronation of Charles III and Camilla on Wikipedia, because of course it is a developing story. I think really good other points to make in these related agendas from foodsafetynews.com. Biden sees future in ag biotech. And of course, private jet flights tripled, CO2 emissions quadrupled since the scamdemic. Complete and utter hypocrisy. And finally, speaking of proclamations, our third and final story, the U.S. Senate votes to end the COVID-19 national emergency. We made it, you guys. The Senate last Wednesday passed a GOP, that is the Republican Party, led resolution that would end the COVID-19 national emergency that has been in place since 2020. The measure passed the upper chamber 68-23. A similar resolution, sponsored by Senator Roger Marshall, a Republican from Kansas, passed the Senate last year, but that was controlled by the Pepsi, so it didn't go anywhere. This year, it passed the Republican-controlled House 229-197, with actually 11 Democrats joining all those Republicans. President Biden last year threatened to veto the measure. This year, he did not threaten a veto, but issued a statement of administration principles before the House vote objecting to the resolution. On Wednesday, he said he would sign the measure. And of course, here's the people who speak for him. The president strongly opposes H.J. Res 7, and the administration is planning to wind down the COVID national emergency and public health emergency on May 11th. If the bill comes to his desk, however, he will sign it, and the administration will continue working with agencies to wind down the national emergency with as much notice as possible to Americans who could potentially be impacted, a White House official says, because they suddenly care about you being impacted. The national emergency is different from the public health emergency, though the White House say they will end both of these on May 11th if we can make it through the coronation and all that stuff, James. Under federal law, U.S. Congress has the power to cower on the floor when FBI informants with funny headgear are led into the Capitol by the cops. They can also ask for periodic votes to terminate a national emergency. President Biden used the powers under the national emergency declaration as the underpinning for his student loan forgiveness plan, which is currently, of course, tied up in court as it is wildly unconstitutional. The initial declaration allowed, heck of a job, FEMA, to mobilize personnel to support state and local agencies as they work to combat the virus. The move also allowed FEMA to access billions of dollars. That's where the action is. In completely unrelated news, James, America launders $276 billion in scamdemic relief funds. They call it fraud and waste. It's not a bug, it's the feature. And then, of course, this week, which people are probably yelling at us this whole time, why are you talking about it? Then this week, they totally arrested the bad guy. The guy that they foisted the germ warfare upon, so that then when he reacted the way that he wanted them to, they hate Orange Man, but man, they love his MAGA jabs. Man, are you still talking about COVID?
Face it, man, they got us. Get over it. Oh, man. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll see your May 11th and I'll raise you a May 8th because apparently Japan is going to end its COVID-19 border controls on May 8th. Yes, to this very day. You still need proof of at least 3 vaccinations or a PCR test from the last 72 hours in order to declare yourself fit to enter Japan. But don't worry, guys. On May 8th, apparently they're planning on scrapping that. So there you go. Whew, yay. Getting ahead of the times there, Japan. Absolute. Yeah, this is it in a nutshell. Okay, so I've said this throughout the entire generated crisis. I will continue to say it. The entire point of what we have lived through is precedent setting. They wanted this precedent wired in. They wanted to train the population. When we say 2 weeks to flatten the curve, you guys all get it, scramble into your houses and do whatever we say. You take whatever medical interventions we say. We get to enforce that. We get to create laws about it, and maybe those laws will be struck down later. Mandates will be struck down by the courts, whatever. But in that time period, what are you going to do? You're going to lose your job and potentially go homeless? No, you're going to do whatever we say. That is what this was always about. And they at precisely the point at which they feel they have successfully implemented that precedent, then boop, yeah, don't worry, guys. You see, back to your little lives. You continue scurrying along until we tell you otherwise. That's what this was always about. So I see it similar to the Freedom Convoy Emergency Act implementation. Again, yeah, they only did it for, don't worry, it was just for a week or so. And yeah, they froze some bank accounts and that lasted several months. But whatever, guys, get over it. That was so last year. Now here's something else to think about. Anyway, so to the extent that they have succeeded in setting this precedent, and I don't see any leaders getting hauled before any courts being tried for crimes against humanity for the actions that they committed in helping to commit this atrocity on the human race. So hey, looks like they did win, huh?
Man, back in Oregon, they have now overturned the vaccine mandate. They forced people to get this, and this is like we said, couple years, maybe a couple months will go by. What? We didn't have to. They now didn't have to. That thing you were going to kill everybody with, now it's totally cool. Imagine how pissed some of those people must be that were forced, tricked, cajoled, threatened into going along with this, only to have a few more months go by and be like, it's fine. I think so much of it is about humiliation. It's about embarrassing people and making them feel dumb and stupid and small, that they fell for it or that they didn't fall. Either way, I think it's all meant to kind of psychologically traumatize the public. And as you're talking about precedents, it's not just the government precedents, but it's the psychological precedents that have been set. And it's a shame. And that's what we've been sad about here the last 3 years, is what's happened to our friends and family. But we're the crazy ones still talking about it, right, James?
Now, let's take a look at this clip from the Kim Iverson show about the current situation in Gaza.
Mosque is Al-Aqsa, and you know, they meditate, they pray, and thousands and thousands of them descend onto Jerusalem. And Israel, for many years, they have been putting all kinds of restrictions, preventing men under the age of 40 from entering Jerusalem. Many of them have to climb over Israel's apartheid wall or get smuggled in. to get into there. And we saw, I mean, you know, the pictures speak 1,000 words. Those were unarmed civilians who were in the midst of their prayers. And the Israeli media and its surrogates, they tried to present it as they were hiding in Al-Aqsa. And that's really a blatant lie, because every single year, Palestinians go to Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is something very well known. And the Israeli soldiers, they go in with full gear, desecrated with their boots, carrying guns, lobbing stun grenades and rubber bullets. And we've seen the result. And there is no excuse for this. It's a violation of international law. It has been condemned by several countries. Of course, the United States says they usually condemn Palestinians when something, when violence happens. But then the statement that comes out from the United States is that they are concerned. Now, you've seen thousands and thousands of Israelis demonstrating in Tel Aviv against this right-wing extremist fascist government. But you haven't seen Israeli soldiers beating up the Israeli demonstrators. But then when they come to Palestinian territories, they have the green light to not only attack them viciously, but in certain instances, kill them.
And that was what was happening fairly recently in the West Bank. From what I understand, is that there was a lot of people. Many Palestinians have been killed. This year alone, has it been 90? Over 90. Over
yeah,
90?
and several hundred injured. And last year we've had the murder of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian American. And not only she was murdered, but her funeral was attacked. Israel, I saw today in the media, for example, when we talk about these rockets, that one of those rockets landed close to a children's playground. And so the media covered that, but they forgot to mention that in 2014, Israeli rockets killed 4 kids playing at the beach in Gaza. So we see the double standard in the coverage, and you can see the frustration, for Palestinians and Palestinian Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely one-sided coverage, and really just the painting of an entire group of people as terrorists. And that seems to always be the excuse. It's, well, this is safety and security issue. We have to stop the terrorists that are going to be coming after us, and so we have to storm the mosques. We have to beat the people. We have to do all these checkpoints, and it's really, really. I've been to the West Bank myself. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to Al-Aqsa Mosque. I've seen this with my own eyes, what actually is happening there. And it is very much a one-sided narrative here in the United States, very much a one-sided narrative. And when you go there and you see it for yourself, you can feel the tension in the air. You see, I went to Al-Aqsa Mosque and I actually saw a big parade of people marching around, really just there to intimidate the worshipers, the Muslim worshipers who were there. Can you give us some, I think a lot of people don't really fully understand the history of that site and why it's such a contentious area, and really why the real reason why these Israeli soldiers are going after these worshipers in this mosque. And my thinking is they ultimately want them to stop going. They ultimately want to make it so difficult to pray in this mosque that they just go somewhere else, because you just never know what's going to happen when you're there. So can you explain that history a little bit?
Well, let's start by the real reason. The real reason is the occupation. Jerusalem, I was born in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, was occupied in 1967. And so there is no reason for the Israelis to be there to begin with. And historically, Al-Aqsa has been, a place for worship for Muslims for more than 1,000 years. Recent photos that we've seen, by extremist Israelis, they have been posting pictures of Al-Aqsa. Pictures of the Wailing Wall. And usually the Wailing Wall behind it is Al-Aqsa. And then they had the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock disappear from those pictures. So we know the intent. The intent for these extremists is really to destroy Al-Aqsa and rebuild the temple in its place. And that's well known. This is one of those leaders is Bezalel Smotrich. He's the current Israel's finance minister who recently went to France and displayed a map of Israel that included entire Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. But not only this, he included also Jordan, the country of Jordan, parts of Syria and Lebanon. That's part of greater Israel. So we can talk a lot about this, but listen, in the past 18 months to 2 years, major human rights organizations, international human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, Amnesty International, Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, and others, they all have labeled Israel as an apartheid state. So we know what's going on. When you could go to Jerusalem, most Palestinians cannot use the roads that Jewish Israelis use to go to their settlements that are built on Palestinian land. Now, this is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Transfer of population, whether in or out of an occupied territory, is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Yet the media here says it is disputed, as if nothing happened in 1967 and then there were no populations transferred there. So when Palestinians live on a daily basis like this, watching, privileged Jewish Israelis taking over day in, day out their properties, they're prevented from traveling on major highways. They have to stand in line for hours to go through checkpoints. What do you describe this as? We describe it as apartheid.
Yeah, and I want people to really fully understand this, because I've heard all of these things and then I didn't understand it until I went for myself. It sounds almost like made up that there's these different roads, but it's true. There are certain roads that are in the West Bank, in what should be the Palestinians' land, and you're not allowed to drive on those roads if you're not an Israeli. You have to be an Israeli. Your car has to have the Israeli license plate. You yourself have to be carrying paper. Everyone in Israel carries papers. Everyone in Israel and throughout Palestine, Jerusalem, everybody has to carry papers. And I would love for you to explain that. But if you're not carrying the correct paper, because they have all these different types of papers, if you're not carrying the correct paper and you're on that road, you're in big trouble. If you're in the wrong car and you're on that road, you're in big trouble. And these are roads that are, and then you're driving on the side road next to that road, and that road is for the Palestinians, and you can just see, the nice, beautiful road. And it's a beautiful, they build nice road with nice walls for the Israeli drivers, and then the Palestinians are on these roads on the other side. It's unbelievable it's unbelievable that a society that is claiming to be a forward Western democratic style society such as Israel do this to a group of people. But can you explain the papers so that people understand the different sorts of citizenship that you have in Israel and Palestine and Jerusalem, and how it affects the travel?
Right. Well, I did a documentary about this in 2015 called Occupied Minds, and I witnessed as they were building that wall. But what happened since the 1967 occupation of the West Bank and Gaza? Israel has created a multi-tier system for Palestinians. And people have to understand now, if we look at Palestine, we call historic Palestine, which is the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Today, I believe that Palestinians are the majority. If they're not the majority, they're at par with the Jewish Israeli population, despite all of the immigration and transfers and so forth. And why is this? I'll start with the lowest, according to the Israelis, how they kind of put that tier system, are the residents of Gaza. They live, you have close to 2 million or 2.2 probably million Palestinians living in the largest open air prison. They cannot travel by land. They cannot travel by sea. Many of them have to wait months, if not years, for a permit to travel, or they have to use a tunnel to cross into Egypt, an illegally constructed tunnel to cross into Egypt. And so that's one tier. They cannot do anything, really. They cannot do anything. I mean, in certain humanitarian cases, someone who's suffering from cancer might have to wait 6, 7, 8 months to get a permit to go to a hospital in Jerusalem, a Palestinian hospital like Al-Maqasid Hospital. Then you have the Palestinians who are living in the West Bank, and then you have, actually, those are currently under 2 tiers because you have different areas, area A and C and so forth. There are the ones who live under the Palestinian Authority since Oslo, and they carry a Palestinian identity card, a Palestinian passport. They cannot cross into Jerusalem. They have to get a certain permit to go there. And then you have also others who live basically in towns and villages. Half of their land has been taken over by settlers, and they are under Israeli control, but they are also neither Palestinian nor, legally speaking, nor Israeli. They have a different kind of tier. And then you have the residents of Jerusalem. I was born in Jerusalem. We have a Jerusalem ID, which grants us residency, but the residency that the Israeli government can deny you at any time. For the craziest reasons, like if you lived outside the country for more than 2-3 years, they can deny you the residency. If you marry someone from the West Bank, you can't bring your spouse in, or they will deny you your residency. And then you have Palestinians who are holders of Israeli passports, and we refer to them as 1948 Palestinians. So you have all these different tiers. Under the law, they have different functionality. And of course, Palestinians under Israeli occupation, they are under military governing laws. Unlike Palestinians who are in 1948 with Israeli passports, or even settlers, Jewish settlers who are living on Palestinian land, they fall under civil Israeli law. So it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it. And I'm not going to get into all the refugees who have been pushed out and they are now living in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and elsewhere.
It's the most bizarre thing. And just to sort of paint this picture a little bit more for those watching who can't really quite wrap their minds around it, these different tiers mean you can travel to certain areas. So I met people who were Jerusalemites. They were born in Jerusalem. Their families were in Jerusalem. They married a person from Bethlehem, and they then have to make a decision. If you fall in love with someone who's from Bethlehem, that person from Bethlehem, which is only, how many minutes away is Bethlehem from Jerusalem? It's not far, right? Jamal,
without a checkpoint, should take you about 15 to 20 minutes.
15, 20 minutes, right, from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. So you fall in love with somebody from Bethlehem. The Israelis will not allow that person from Bethlehem to gain Jerusalemite identification and move to Jerusalem. They're trying to get Palestinians out, not allow any of them back in. So the person from Jerusalem has to choose love or stay in Jerusalem, in their city 15 minutes away. They choose love. They're going to have to leave Jerusalem because their spouse cannot come live with them in Jerusalem. And I saw this happen to so many people when I was there. When you leave Jerusalem, here's where it gets really messed up. You leave Jerusalem, you go marry your spouse, you go live in Bethlehem. You lose your identification to go to Jerusalem. Your parents live in Jerusalem. You cannot visit your own parents 15 minutes away. Your parent has a problem. They need go to the doctor. It's a holiday. You're not allowed to visit your parents unless you get special permission from the Israeli government to allow you that pass into Jerusalem to visit your family. I knew an American Palestinian. Now, Americans are supposed to be able to travel anywhere and everywhere throughout the whole region. But if you're an American Palestinian and they find out that you're actually there to build up Palestinians in some way. So I knew an American there who owned a business and who came back to Palestine, born and raised in the United States, totally a Californian American. Went over there to help run the family business. 3 years was able to kind of go under the radar, go visit Tel Aviv, go hang out anywhere and fly out of the Tel Aviv airport. But then the Israeli government figured out that American was actually there to run a Palestinian business and to build up Palestine. and put a special thing in their passport, in their American passport, that said, you're now a West Banker. Yeah, you're now a West Banker, and you don't even get the right to go to Jerusalem. So he was asking me if I could bring things to his grandmother in Jerusalem, which is only not very far away, because an American was being told you're not allowed to travel around because you're actually a Palestinian and we want you to go away. And it's the most bizarre thing, that this different tier and different papers and where you're allowed to go and where you're not allowed to go. 15 minutes you're not allowed to go to that neighboring place. Because I'm wanting to paint this picture as to why the Palestinians why there's so much tension, why there's these rockets that ultimately fly into Israel. Tell us about the water situation in Palestine at this point. I know that the people they're not getting running water every day.
Well, no. If you go to Ramallah, and I'm sure if you went to Ramallah and Bethlehem, and you saw all the buildings there, they all have water tanks. I mean, this is something, I don't know if you noticed that. They have black plastic large water tanks. You don't see this in settlements. You don't see this in Tel Aviv. You don't see this anywhere else except in the West Bank. And the question is why? And that's because Palestinians get their own water from artesian wells on their land only sometimes once or twice a week. So they have to fill their water tanks to last them for the entire week, while Israeli settlers, they have, just like right here in the United States, water on demand. And of course, water is very rare. I mean, especially now with global warming and things like this. And it's very important. Israel not only does this, but they also siphon the water from beneath the farmland where Palestinians actually live. And so the water situation. And I have to mention one other thing. The funny thing about it is not only they steal the water, but they have Israel's water company sells the water back to the Palestinians. So not only they don't get enough of it, but they sell it back. Now you can go to the settlements and you can see the settlers, they have swimming pools, they have green lawns like here with sprinkler systems, and the Palestinians, they live off the water. And I mean by this is an agrarian society where they have olive trees, they have their livelihood, and that's why the attachment of Palestinians to the olive trees. When settlers go and destroy, the first thing they do to Palestinians is they go and destroy their olive trees. So, it's all connected with this, oppression and really a full-fledged apartheid system.
Yeah, and I want people to really understand, when I was there, it was really obvious that ultimately the goal is to push Palestinians out. The ultimate goal is to make life so miserable, so difficult. You've got to go through checkpoints if you want to go to school, if you want to go to work, and that if they close down that checkpoint that day and you got to go to a different checkpoint, now you're late. And, people in Palestine have to, here in Los Angeles, we have to always allot for an extra 45 minutes to get somewhere. But in Palestine, they have to allot an extra couple of hours just to get to school in the morning or just to get to work in the morning, because of it's unknown which checkpoint is going to be there available or not. But it was really obvious to me that the goal is to get the Palestinians to say, this is too hard. I'm just going to go live in Jordan. Or this is too hard. I'm going to immigrate somewhere else, because it is a very difficult life. And it seems to me that, what's going on in Al-Aqsa, this seems to happen every year, this attack on the worshipers at Al-Aqsa during Ramadan. Is this a yearly thing that seems to happen, or how often is this happening?
It is a yearly thing. I mean, you don't have to wait for Ramadan. It happens almost every single Friday. And as I've mentioned, Palestinians go to Al-Aqsa. That's their major mosque to pray every single Friday. You can go and see young Palestinians praying in the streets outside the old city because they are prevented. And as I've mentioned, if you're under the age of 40, the Israelis check your ID and they won't let you in. They decide who can go in and who cannot, go in. And so people just pray right there in the streets. And I wanted to comment on something also you've mentioned about, the story you've mentioned about your Palestinian American friend this is, of course, sadly, it's too common, but also Palestinian Americans get harassed when they travel, right? They travel through Ben Gurion Airport. Many of them are not let in, even though they were born in Palestine, like in Jerusalem and other places. And now Israel and the United States are working on a visa waiver program. I think this is very important for people to know that what Israel now wants is to have its own citizens travel to the United States without a visa, just like the Europeans, just like citizens from France and Germany and so forth. And the decision is coming into fruition this September. And part of the conditions that have been put on Israel is to make sure that they don't discriminate against Americans. But they do, and they still do that. You know, they just basically profile you at the airport, and they decide whether they want to let you in or they don't want to let you in. But at the same time, they receive $3.8 billion from the United States, and they want the United States to allow all their citizens, Jewish citizens, to enter this country without a visa.
Yeah.
Now, let's take a look at this clip from journalist Eva Bartlett debunking the Western media's new Mariupol mass grave hoax.
Is it a normal cemetery?
Yes, it's a normal cemetery because there are some graves from another dates. It's normal in general.
Yeah.
It's normal cemetery.
Yeah. I really hate wasting time on this, but since in recent days Western media have resurrected the mass graves near Mariupol hoax, and since, unlike any of the people behind those claims, I'm actually in the Donetsk People's Republic and actually went to the sites in question, I will indeed have to waste some time on this. Keep in mind, a mass grave is not a cemetery with new single plots. A mass grave is a pit into which countless bodies have been thrown and then buried. It's an idea, an image that evokes horror, which is precisely why Western media are pushing this narrative of mass graves outside of Mariupol. Let's look back to April, when the first such claims emerged. Reports cited the former mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko, nowhere near the city, as the source of information that 9,000 bodies had been thrown into pits 30 meters wide. He called it the biggest war crime of the 21st century. At the time, I went to the main site of the claims, Mangush, west of Mariupol, and found a cemetery that was expanding and had empty plots. I spoke with two gravediggers there who were indignant at the claims of mass graves.
Это два квадрата, вот квадрат, и этот квадрат специально предназначены для мирного населения. Всех хоронили, как говорится, под номерами, которые опись ведется в морге, особые приметы, у кого были документы, на табличках указаны фамилия, имя, отчество. Всех хоронили в отдельных могилах и в гробах.
Во-первых, здесь есть одна могила на одного человека. Человек хоронится в гробах. Есть ниже даже захороненные военнослужащие украинской армии, которые захоронены в гробах, в отдельной могиле. Если он опознан, у него есть табличка, либо же он под номером. И найти его как бы можно. Нету здесь массовых могил, захоронений не было.
Это не братские могилы, и никто тут никого не, как говорится, в общую могилу не свалю.
Corporate media now have toned down the mass grave, rebranding it as mass burial site, which isn't the same thing. Arlington Cemetery could be described as a mass burial site, for example. What the BBC and most media do not specify, however, is that the mass burial sites are not mere fields, but existing cemeteries, and in the case of Stary Krym, the focus of new reports, one of the largest cemeteries in Europe. It even has a church, a priest who was conducting a funeral service while I was there, and is used to bury recently deceased, like cemeteries do around the world.
меня был любимый заяц, она спала с ним. А ночью любила кушать. Спать нет, не буду спать, буду кушать. Давай мне сыр
She
и
loved
колбаску.
to eat at night during the night. They find them after the fight, so it's new.
Reborn.
Reborn, like exhumate.
Yeah,
Them reborn.
that makes sense. Rebury.
Rebury.
While most of the current media hysteria around supposed mass graves is regarding the vast cemetery in Stary Krim, a much smaller plot in Vinogradny, just east of Mariupol, is also dubbed site of a mass grave or mass burial site. As with how media reported on Stary Krim, most Western media spewing the mass grave propaganda around Vinogradny again neglect to mention the site is a normal cemetery with new graves. In neither of the two cemeteries I visited the other day, nor in April in Mangush, did anyone stop me from entering the cemetery, ask me why I was filming, attempt to prevent me from filming, or in any way attempt to intimidate me, as one might expect if filming at the site of an alleged mass grave. In fact, the only people I saw in Vinogradny were a man and woman visiting a gravesite. They said that those whose grave didn't have a cross would not have had documents on them, couldn't be identified, and so were buried in graves marked with the numbered placard, and those who could be identified would have the crosses seen throughout the cemetery. Someone made an interesting observation on Twitter, saying in their Western country, a population the size of, say, 500,000 would normally have 320 deaths per month from all causes, including old age, illness, accidents, etc., meaning up to 320 new graves per month. I can't verify that math, but it seems logical. And indeed, if you recall back in Stary Krim, there was an elderly man being buried, and he certainly wouldn't have been victim of the fighting back in March or February. He would have been an older man that passed either due to illness or old age. That's not to say there weren't victims of the fighting in the three cemeteries I visited. Of course there would have been. But keep in mind that the Azov Nazis and Ukrainian forces have a penchant for occupying schools, occupying upper floors of apartments, holding civilians hostage as human shields, firing on Donbass and Russian forces from those apartments, often guaranteeing return fire, and even themselves firing on the apartments, as many testimonies out of Mariupol, Volnovakha, and many other Donbass areas recovered from Ukrainian forces.
Украинская власть, спасибо вам за это все, твари вы. Сами попрятались, денег нагребли, а мы тут помираем теперь. Защитники, какие они защитники? Попрятались вот там на заводе, в центре города. Зачем? Чтобы бомбили дома мирные. Людей некуда девать. Куча трупов.
Вот это дом, 4-й подъезд. Дочка насмерть. Я ее похоронила напротив окон
дочку
своих.
Похоронили. Она у нас пролежала дома 5 дней. А куда уже? Мы ее на 6-й день уже похоронили. Вот пришлось во дворе откопать могилу и временно захоронить. 27 лет была девочка.
Она тоже так получила. Что же получила? Подняться на мост.
When we try to get out to the bridge in order to leave the city, the snipers fire at us. They were the part of Azov people with blue armbands. Most likely it was them to be firing, because by that time the Ukrainian army had not been in this area for a long time.
Меня зовут Быкова Ирина Степановна. Я из Мариуполя.
Это какого числа было, не помню?
24-го.
Адрес хоть приблизительно.
Улица Зелинского, 17А. Вот. Мы собрали вещи, какие успели, и пошли к гуманитарному автобусу, который организовала ДНР.
Когда вы выехали из города?
24-го. Да. Когда мы переходили улицу, а мы были на стороне, там, где были украинские военные, нам надо было перейти улицу, на другой стороне стояла ДНР. Когда мы переходили улицу, Украина стала нас обстреливать целенаправленно. Она стреляла по нам.
Из минометов стреляли? Или
Они сначала стреляли из автоматов Калашникова. Потом, когда мы упали на землю, лежали. Потом, когда все вроде бы стало тихо, мы поднялись, и у нас дорога широкая, и полосы разграничены забором и зелеными насаждениями. Вот. И когда мы встали из-за этого забора, чтобы вторую часть дороги перебежать, стали бить минометы. Ну, ДНР увидела, видимо, это я так предполагаю, потому что они стали очень сильно стрелять в их сторону, и ребята крикнули бежать к ним.
Они вас прикрыли?
Да, они нас прикрыли, и когда мы добежали, они схватили нас и толкнули в подъезд.
The Ukrainian military were mostly hiding behind civilians and the patients. Entering the wards, they were calling everyone bastards, The women asked them to leave and not shoot. They also called them bastards in response. The women were keeping silent and weeping quietly. We were begging for water, but they didn't even bother. They gave us nothing. Wherever you go, the Ukrainian troops are firing everywhere and simply do not let people go anywhere. People just died from hunger and dehydration. This is insane. I even buried people myself. I buried 5 civilians near the house. My wife lives on Komsomolsky Boulevard. She came and told me that a Ukrainian tank had arrived and was firing point blank at the house. I have a family there, my children. They ran like mice through the cellars. Now I don't even know where they are. They seem to be alive. I hope everything will be fine. She said she wouldn't be back to the hospital again. People are being shot right in their back. Civilians are being shot.
Мы приняли тоже вот в подвал тоже очень много беженцев с соседних улиц, потому что они когда заходили, давали 5-10 минут.
Чтобы ушли мирные?
Да.
То есть не выгоняли мирных?
Выгоняли. У тебя вот тут как есть, там многие в халатах прибегали.
Чем вы объясняли?
Бля, мы вот здесь занимаем позицию. То есть вот все, не ебет. Ну, извиняюсь за выражение, но я образно говорю, как есть. То есть вот у вас есть 5 минут собраться и куда хотите. То есть
возражения не принимались?
Ну, а как ты примешь? Какое возражение? Если тебя там, да, ну вот если вот так. Вот сгорел дом, кстати, 21-й, Владимирской. То есть прям вот он дом, двор, ну, метров 15. Ну, вот, то есть вот он дом, вот площадка, грубо говоря, вот как здесь, да. То есть минометы стояли, спокойно стреляли, то есть вот. То есть люди вот здесь вот сидят, готовят, вот миномет, 15 метров.
Не пытались ничего сказать?
Были случаи такие, как мы очень тоже бегали, постоянно тоже хоронили много тоже кого. Тоже товарищ у нас жил, тоже вчера только выехал с Мариуполя, поехал вот в сторону Безименного, здесь встретили. У него убило отца осколком. То есть убила отца, пытались 5 дней похоронить. То есть мы выходим, хоронили, получается, там, где стадион, не знаю, если мариупольский нет, на левого берега, там, где стадион, ну, то есть детский садик, пытались на детском садике похоронить. То есть мы выходим, начинаем копать могилу. То есть, ну, это, блядь, это даже, ну, все видят, все, это не то, что там где-то за 10 километров, то есть соседний двор начинают тебе... Такая игра, да, такая игра, как...
В смысле, это украинский?
Да.
Зачем?
А я же говорю, это как игра. То есть не по нам, но недолет и перелет. То есть начинаешь...
То есть они видят, что вы хороните,
да.
И они с вами вот так играются, минометом?
Да. То есть вот мы падаем, то есть мы 5 дней вот так вот пытались похоронить, в итоге
они
сожгли.
Вам не давали хоронить?
Да. В итоге просто сожгли тело. Мародерство было. Мародерство, вот пример приведу магазина электроники тоже. Это вот, допустим, конкретно что видел. То есть это у нас на площади есть магазин GSM. То есть мы с товарищем вышли, ну, как товарищ, тоже там познакомились с соседнего подъезда. Да. То есть мы вышли, хотели найти, ну, хоть где-то там, то есть магазины все же уже, естественно, битые, какие-то вещи, чтобы просто, ну, именно вещи. И был у нас магазин GSM. Это сейчас вот смешно покажется, но это реальные слова были. То есть мы подходим, подъехала машина. То есть вышли 4 военных, взорвали дверь.
Взорвали?
Ну, там какая-то хрень, она бахнула, ну, не сильно. Вот смешное слово, но это на самом деле правда. Заходите, есть чем поживиться. Кстати, вот, сейчас еще пример расскажу. 5 числа мы первый раз решили попробовать проехать в город с хлопцем. Тоже потому что через постмост оттуда ж не выпускали ни туда, ни обратно. Решили попробовать 13-го проехать. И 13 числа, получается, нас с машин, то есть мы проезжаем дрампарк, едем, то есть ни солдат, ни военных, никого. Просто выбежали, машину начали стрелять. Он, естественно, по газам и проехал. То есть там проехали, ну, метров 200-300, ну, где-то вперед, ну, не скажу точно. То есть там вышли, достали документы с поднятыми руками, вернулись к этим позициям, когда они с кустов выбежали. То есть, ребята, не стреляйте, ну, то есть не стреляйте. Сейчас вот коронная фраза будет, вот можно посмеяться. То есть машину простреляли, пацана ранило в ногу. Получается, меня никуда не ранило, но машина вся прострелена и зад, и правая часть, и зад весь прострелен. Получается, с правой стороны у нас только 13 пуль мы насчитали, и сзади, честно, не помню сколько, но правая вся часть. Коронная фраза была: мы ж не стреляли, а у него же еще надпись тоже, это, ну, сейчас же все ж пишут, дети, дети ж. Он говорит, мы специально, говорит, стреляли мимо, говорит, вдруг машины дети. Мы уже ничего не стали.
Но
Хорошо,
они
спасибо, что не убили.
А кто там был? ВСУ,
Украинский.
Тероборона,
Не
Азов,
скажу.
Зеленский.
По поводу властей Мариуполя,
можно не стесняться.
это интересно, классно сказать. Мариуполь не сдается и упиздить с города. Ну,
это и про мэра?
Да. Я думаю, там очень у нас многие его жаждут видеть. Очень многие.
За шею подержаться.
Last we will look at these clips from Ryan Christian of The Last American Vagabond, discussing the clown of the week, Lindsey Graham, and officials getting ill after visiting East Palestine.
History, as we know, every single society at some point has fallen or been revolted against and so on. Revolts and coups and stuff, very common. Powers that wish they were today know that. So I question simply if this is what we are, why we're in the situation we are today, whether it's in the parliament system of the UK or the very clear two-party system in the United States. That throughout history, people have always eventually revolted against the power. We know that. So it's possible that at some point the powers got together, whether it's, across whether just in their own situation, their own country, and said, how do we stop that from happening? And so they decided to create an illusion of a system going back and forth, a two-party illusion. So every 4 years, we get to feel like we're revolting. Every 4 years, we get to push back against the power structure and take back the power for ourselves. Is that what's happening? Or are we pushing and fighting against ourselves and failing to see what the real power is, right? Instead of going against the true power that controls both sides of this game. I just thought that was an interesting thought. And realizing that throughout history, there's always been that ebb and flow. And for a long time, we've been essentially pacified by feeling like we're fighting that power, but all we're really fighting is ourselves. Maybe that's completely misguided. Maybe there's much more to the story, probably. But I just thought that was an interesting thought to consider how the two-party paradigm is being used against us right now. But let's talk about foreign policy. Because obviously that's where this game is being played the longest, against other people at our expense, using our tax dollars in our name. Now it's, it always has been pointed at us, but now it's being directed and primarily at us in this country, our own, the U.S. government. But what's important to see that this is the whole multipolar world discussion is highlighting the fact that the U.S. government is very rapidly losing its clout, losing its influence around the world. Now, it should kind of scare everybody because it's going to create an unstable situation, probably, especially when the U.S. government lashes out and takes irrational action to stop that from happening. But we talked about the impending Mexico regime change on this article, or this discussion on the 25th of, this was March 25th. This was just recent. Just like we talked about the Bolivia regime change, which ultimately happened. I've mentioned this a few times, and I believe this is coming. I really do. We're going to listen to Lindsey Graham yet again. We pointed out two things just a couple of days ago where he actually on the record said that he was going to start initiating legislation to deem the cartels terrorists so the U.S. government could invade Mexico. That's not my opinion. That's actually what he said, essentially paraphrasing, but that's what he said, which is just mind-blowing because they see Mexico as a subservient, right? As a vassal state. It's not, but that's how they want it to be. It just shows you how they perceive themselves. And the way Lindsey Graham speaks in this is just, I don't even think he realizes the level of hubris he has when he's talking about this, as if he has the right to stand here and make these statements. It's really crazy. I mean, from a presidential perspective, this should be insulting to the president. Why in the world Lindsey Graham feels like he can stand up and speak to a foreign leader on behalf of the country is kind of crazy. But it says, to the president of Mexico, I'm happy to respond to the questions you posed last week. He says, I want us to work together, but I'm also prepared to do whatever is necessary to prevent deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. Okay, so let's ignore the fact that the U.S. government is completely involved and complicit with the flow and traffic of drugs all over the world, including the United States, and is very clearly complicit in working with groups like these cartels for years and decades in all sorts of different ways. And just whether connected to Mexico or not, The U.S. government has been routinely caught for trafficking cocaine and drugs and human trafficking and all over the world. You could deny it all you want. It's the most easiest thing in the world to prove. Oh, but it's for freedom, though. Who cares? Not even what it's really about. But they'll scream up and down. It's about, we had to do this for we're talking about the Iran-Contra discussion. Well, we were trying to fight for freedom. No, we know the story now, guys. We know what was really going on. And the way you flooded the market with the black community with crack cocaine and all this different stuff wasn't for freedom. There was obvious agendas going on. So here we have another game being played where they're starting to frame Mexico as being the core of the problem, when in reality, it's been because of the U.S. actions, whether we're talking about South America, Mexico, everywhere in the world we're talking about. It's obvious to see how their foreign policy has caused most of the problems they use to justify their actions. That doesn't mean they're the only problem in the world. We're just talking about this focal point from Mexico and the United States and what they've done around the world. This is pretty concerning, and it should be, because what Mexico could do, especially if they start aligning with other foreign powers, is only going to guarantee what seemingly Graham wants to execute here.
Senator Lindsey Graham. Hello, Senator Lindsey Graham here. Yesterday, the president of Mexico asked me 5 questions. Mr. President, I'm going to give you the answer here just in a second. But the first thing I want to do is make a statement. I wish to work with you and your government to deal with the Mexican cartels that exist in your country that are producing fentanyl at an alarming rate, killing thousands of Americans, 70,000 last year from fentanyl poisoning alone.
Let's not pretend for a moment that the U.S. government cares about your life or the drugs you take. What they care about is control. The obvious point is to realize that the invasion of Afghanistan saw the increased production of opium by 90% when it had almost been eradicated before by the Taliban. And then suddenly they take over and, oh my God, it floods. 90% increase. And then weirdly enough, the exact correlation was the opioid crisis. Totally not connected, though. Obviously. So the point is that this is not something they actually care about. We could point at, most of the fentanyl comes from China. So it's odd that they love to focus on the gangs because that's an easy way to make this a point. And he just mentioned China, but what's interesting is that's a fraction of the real problem. Most of it comes in the mail. We've talked about this many times. So why then is this really about drugs? It's because it's the way to control the perception, just like the marijuana influx from the dangerous Mexicans back in the original illegalization of cannabis. That's how they did it then. Same thing here.
The problem I have with you, be honest with you, Mr. President, is that you deny there are areas of your country controlled by drug cartels. You are in denial.
Okay, so what do we take that? How do we take that? Who gets to decide? Right? No one's presenting evidence, right? We get narratives from the U.S. government. We get propagandized discussions from groups that are completely controlled by the U.S. government. Now, it doesn't mean he's lying. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that was the truth. And obviously, AMLO is incentivized to not say that because he knows that'll make him look weak. Either way, it doesn't matter, does it? Because the U.S. government just gets to say that's the case and you're lying. Shut up, right? Bolivia was an illegal election. Oh, no, it wasn't. MIT proved it wasn't, but no one cares. It's still not Evo Morales in power. So the truth doesn't matter. The narrative is what matters. And so all he's doing is solidifying that, oh, you're wrong and that's not true. Well, is he telling the truth? How many times has Lindsey Graham been caught lying or misleading or being flat out wrong? Quite a lot.
The map you see behind me, the red areas, are a State Department map telling Americans don't go to these areas because they're too dangerous, controlled by drug cartels.
Right, because we can trust the State Department, right? They never lie.
The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security all agree with me that drug cartels operate in your country freely and openly. I'd like to work with you to stop that.
Yeah, they also operate in the United States. Easy to prove. But that's okay, though, because we don't want to invade ourselves. So we don't care about that. We only care about pointing out what we allow over there so we can use that for our benefit. Yes, call me jaded, call me a pessimist. I think we have reason to be.
Practice. To the questions.
Is fentanyl consumed in the United States? Yes or no?
Mr. President, fentanyl is consumed in the United States. 11,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the southern border this year, fiscal year. Last year's 14,000 pounds. 11,000 pounds, Mr. President, is enough to kill 2.5 billion people. Yes, it's consumed in the United States. Here's the problem. We need to work on that. But 2 young people from a single family bought 2 Percocet tablets laced with fentanyl. They both died.
Right. So we bring it down to a horror story like your dangerous Halloween candy with razors. quite frankly, I don't even know if I believe that story. Not that it's not possible. Of course it's possible. But the idea, this is how the government operates, how propaganda works. You don't, why would you need to bring it down? Like, but here's the real problem, Mr. President. These two kids, this story. That's the real problem. The real problem is that this could kill people. Why you need to bring it down to a personalized emotional story is because you're trying to manipulate people, period. So the idea, first of all, is that that's most likely a lie. Just my opinion. But ask yourself, so 2 Percocet pills, right, that are already drugs that people buy already. So you're telling me that people bought these, unknowingly had fentanyl, which, by the way, is not cheap. So you're telling me that somebody went out of their way to lace drugs that they were selling or giving to other people and not telling them about it, which means they're losing money. To what end? So they can just hurt people? Is the argument that they're just trying to flood this country with drugs to hurt? That's certainly possible, but that's not what he's saying. He's essentially making the argument that people are doing this because they want to, just to do it. Because he's not talking about people knowingly buying fentanyl-laced pills. He's talking about people that get it and don't know it's there. Now, trust me, it's been written about. We're talking about this very clearly, but that doesn't make sense. The same point I make about Halloween. Are we really going to pretend that people are going to put drugs in candy and just to do it and laugh at the fact that it might be hurting somebody? I mean, it certainly can happen, but you understand this is not, it doesn't make sense. People are losing money when they do that. I just don't buy it, guys. I really don't buy it. But, question it, including, it certainly possibly could be. But something about that doesn't add up to me. And the next part as well.
An 18-month-old child died from exposure at an Airbnb from residual fentanyl. This is a very dangerous drug being put in other drugs.
So residual fentanyl. Now, the idea that they could just go into another room, these stories don't add up to me. It certainly could be just something left on the counter, I guess, and the baby touched it. And it seems like a bit of a stretch. But his point, again, is that people are putting this in their drugs and they don't know that. I just don't, this is only an argument that I think resonates with people that don't understand how this market works. Right? Am I crazy? Tell me in the chat. I don't know of anybody who would do that other than a government operation or intelligence operation or some kind of an attack, which again, if that's what he's arguing, this is an attack by cartels. Why then? What's the objective? If it's attacked by the government, explain that, because the government wants to, it doesn't add up. You don't just get to accept it unless it makes sense. Question what they're pushing, guys. People that would do this would want to profit from it. It would make sense if he simply just said people are buying extra new expensive drugs they sold because and then they're dying too. Why would they need to argue that it's happening without knowing? Because they're trying to scare you, right? Connect that dot. They're trying to make you go, oh no, maybe my thing has fentanyl. That's what that's about. The logic isn't there.
And Americans are buying it, not knowing it.
See?
It's produced in your country, and drug cartels are operating openly in your country, poisoning the Americans.
Poisoning. See, he's actually making the argument. This is an intent. They're wasting their money, not selling the drugs. They're giving you free drugs just to hurt you. Maybe not kill you, but just hurt you. Because the cartels are just maniacs that like to see pain. Oh, so now we're back in the Assad game again? He just likes to murder children. I guess that's all they got. Certainly possible, I guess. Doesn't make sense, though, does it?
Need to work together to stop it.
Who deals fentanyl in the United States? Or better yet, are there drug lords and cartels that deal fentanyl in the United States?
Yeah, they're called the U.S. government.
Mr. President, Mexican drug cartels are operating in our major cities, distributing fentanyl, and we're going after them.
Oh, are you? Right. So explain this to me. So you literally just admitted that these same cartels are literally actively operating in the United States. But you're focusing on Mexico and saying, you better get your stuff in order or we're going to invade. But they're operating in the United States. Did he think that one through? I guess not. So it's okay that we're working on it though. Well, so are they. It just does not add up.
But I want to do more than go after fentanyl dealers in America. I want to educate the public about the danger of drug usage in America. You're right to insist we do that. But I want to work with you to shut down.
Right. So it does. Anyway, I'm going to make a point about drugs or the idea. The point is you have a right to do what you want. Simple. And the idea that you're somehow hurting yourself because of a surreptitious drug you didn't know was there. You could make the very clear argument that that's that person's choice. You have a right to take drugs if you want. It wasn't like they were roofied. They made a choice to take drugs. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, this is all about an agenda that has nothing to do with your safety.
On these labs. And the first problem we got to come to grips with is that the labs operate openly in Mexico and you're doing nothing about it. They get the precursor drugs from China, and if you don't change your policies, we're going to have to take matters in our own hands.
And there's the threat that you knew was coming, right? So we're going to have to do something about that. What other country gets to do that? Based on their assumption that's just, based on what they're saying is happening. And I mean, are we really going to pretend that we don't think that the U.S. government or the CIA are actively involved with this? History alone makes that pretty clearly a possibility.
Drugs from China and nothing about it. They get the precursor drugs operate openly in Mexico and you're doing nothing about it.
All right, that's the point I was thinking about. Like, think about the overlap of saying, so we're actively cooking up BSL-4 labs with gain-of-function research and dangerous biosecurity, but you better stop them from working on drugs. It's just hypocrites. Right? Like the idea that they could do whatever they want, anywhere they want, all over the world, but not anybody else.
They get the precursor drugs from China, and if you don't change your policies, we're going to have to take matters in our own hands. I want to work with you like we did with the country of Colombia dealing with their cocaine problem. I want to work with you to shut these labs down, but you're not helping.
Like you did with Colombia. We'll come right back, Graham. You stay right there. Let's take a look. Let's take real quick. Let's just see what work did he do in Colombia. Well, let's go 4 years ago. Okay. September 19, 2018. Colombia continues to break records for cocaine production. Well, that's interesting. So he must mean for the years after 2018, right? Seeing as how they were getting record-breaking cocaine production at 2018. Okay, what about the next year? Oh, wait a minute. It kept going up. Why is Colombia's cocaine production so high? He must meant after 2019, right? No. April 3rd, 2023. South America's cocaine supply, boom, shows up in Europe. So what's he talking about then? He must be lying or too dumb to know that he is. I'll let you choose.
No.
He is in
matters in our own hands. I want to work with you like we did with the country of Colombia dealing with their cocaine problem.
Okay, so what he really means is we want the cut, right? We want in on your process. So we'll step in. It'll still keep happening. We'll just pretend we're working together to, quote, stop the problem, but we'll just keep it going like we did with Colombia. We'll get record-breaking. How about with Afghanistan? You step in, 90% increase. That's what we're going to promise. Wink, wink. Do you really think I'm wrong? These are my opinions. I ask yourself how we can stand there so confidently and pretend that Colombia, like we did with Colombia. Okay, so then he's literally we're going to increase your fentanyl production just like we did with Colombia as long as you work with us. Tell me I'm wrong.
I want to work with you to shut these labs down, but you're not helping. You're in denial.
Are the people that deal fentanyl in the United States Mexican or American?
Mr. President, the fentanyl distribution network in the United States involves Mexican drug cartels and others. The product is primarily coming from your country, being produced in areas where you have no authority or control. And if you don't change this policy, you're going to require America to do things that I don't want to do, but we must do.
So again, this is Lindsey Graham, an individual who is not very well liked, standing up and literally threatening a foreign country with invasion or military action, or the suggestion therein, because he decided to. Now, it's not new for this guy. This guy has openly threatened Russia, China, North Korea. He's a belligerent ideologue. That's what he is. But just think about how crazy that is. Where's Biden? Don't you take issue with this? He's speaking on behalf of the country.
Can you buy a machine gun or high-powered weapon in a supermarket in the United States? Yes or no?
Mr. President, you can't buy a weapon commercially unless the person has a firearms license. So that's the key.
What program?
I don't even know what that's supposed to mean, right? His point is just he's insulting, basically calling out the gun discussion, which is interesting. But what he said's not true, right? We all know that's not true. You can buy guns all over the place, whether or not there's laws. That's the whole point about why laws take guns only away from law-abiding citizens. But there's plenty of states out there that are, Tennessee is a concealed carry state. You do not need a permit to carry a weapon, period. So he's either lying, doesn't matter. These people are just, I really do wonder whether they just don't know some of these things and are just that uninformed. But often, I think the easy point is to make that they're just trying to misinform people in very specific ways.
Programs do you have to support young people with addiction issues? What are you doing to help them?
We're spending millions of dollars trying to educate people about the dangers of drugs, particularly fentanyl.
Oh, are you? Right. How'd that opioid crisis work that never went away? We just stopped talking about it. Success. Right. Oh, no, we gave them a bunch of Narcan so they can keep getting their drugs, but they can just not die from it. Cool. Right. These people are disgusting. Like, think about the nerve it takes to point this problem out. And meanwhile, as it's actively being facilitated through this country, but they're pointing over Mexico, at the time when they have done literally nothing other than find the people who knowingly killed people with opioids. That's what they did. That's still going on. You realize there's still an emergency declaration for the opioid crisis? They don't even talk about it. It's just disgusting.
People are buying amphetamines to study for a test. They find out it's laced with fentanyl too late and they're dead.
Oh, okay, but it's okay they buy drugs for tests, right? You think about what he just said. They're buying drugs for tests and then they find it's laced. So the problem is that it's laced, not that they're buying drugs for testing. Or that most of these kids don't even need to because they all have ADHD and everything else, or rather, Ritalin or whatever else they get these days. They crush up and snort and actively do so, and they all share it with each other. We all know this. That's okay, though, because our pharmaceutical companies are profiting off of it.
Out it's laced with fentanyl too late and they're dead. It's the leading cause of death, fentanyl poisoning, from 18 to 45-year-olds in America.
No, it's not. 100% no, it's not. It's the injection they're giving people. Clearly.
Last year, 70,000 Americans died from fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah, well, we're looking at hundreds of thousands. We're talking about the injections, but they don't care about that. They don't care about your life. They really don't.
A lot of times people have no idea they're taking fentanyl. 11,000 pounds was seized this year alone coming in from your country. Last year, there's 14,000 pounds. It's made in your country with a connection to China, and you're not doing...
Oh, you see, look how casually skips over that. No, the vast majority comes from China. The U.S. government's own documentation, their own research shows that. I literally just talked about this. But they don't care because they're not. China is not. They can't benefit from Mexico with pointing at China. So they can't. They're going to point at China too when they want to. Right now, this is about the game with China, or excuse me, the game with Mexico. So we'll use it however we want.
Doing much about it. Final thought, Mr. President. Let's work together. If you choose not to work with me, I'm going to do everything in my power to use the laws of the United States to destroy these drug cartels, and whatever is necessary to protect Americans from dying by the tens of thousands, I will do.
Right. Using the laws. And what he means by the laws is the bastardization of our Constitution. Basically, illegally vote. Basically, the point is, as I've often said, just because something becomes law doesn't make it legal. In fact, specifically constitutional. If anything is repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. Mayberry versus Madison. They don't care about that. There's so many things now that are unconstitutional that are directly repugnant to the Constitution. They don't care. But if we ever come back around to an actual understanding of the Constitution and upholding the law, well, a lot of these broken laws will not be upheld. But in his case, what he's actually talking about is just arbitrarily deeming this group a terrorist group, as much as it's not that much of a stretch. We can all agree that these groups are pretty terrible. But then because you deem them that, then just going, well, because that's their designation, even though we just decided that means we can invade the country and do what we want about it. That's not law. That's not legal. I mean, that's straight up, that's terrorism. Just under the guise of what you claim is the law. It's crazy. But here, let's not forget how he helped Colombia, right? I mean, even during the time of the focus on Venezuela, that moment's biggest threat to our democracy. Before it was the North Korean biggest threat to our democracy. Then it was ISIS biggest threat. Now it's the Ukraine, whatever. The biggest threat to our democracy is that moment. During the Venezuelan biggest threat to our democracy, it was Colombia. That was the idea that, they were arguing that Venezuela was the key production of cocaine. And they were lying. They knew they were lying. And the moment the focus went away, well, it's obviously Colombia again. The group the U.S. is working with. But it's a problem when Venezuela produces cocaine. But Colombia, it's okay because they're on our side. And of course, Mexico is now planning to join BRICS, right? The alternative grouping in regard to a new monetary system or a new new currency pegged to something else, not oil, not the U.S. government tied to it, right? And this is, I guarantee you, this is going to cause conflict. just like it always has. Anytime somebody tries to break away, knowing that they're building something outside the control of the U.S. government, as we've seen historically, they lash out. For freedom, right? Mexico's expressed its interest in joining the BRICS group of emerging economies, which currently consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right? I mean, Brazil, India, these are essentially allies, right? So the point, and even South Africa, it's interesting. The U.S. government is losing its influence. And like a dying animal, they're lashing out. So we'll see what happens. I hope nothing bad happens, because this is going to be a terrible thing on the border of the United States and Mexico. Now, speaking to other foreign policy blunders and other terrorist acts, we have the U.S. government involved with Israel and Ukraine, and both of those governments continue to assassinate people and murder people abroad with zero consequence. And understand, this isn't even debatable. Israel just literally bombed Syria 4 times in a process of a week. Nobody cares, other than people like us. Civilians died. They bombed the airport of Damascus. Can you imagine that happening any other country in the West? Or if it was in reverse, God forbid, we'd be in war right now. But, because they claim Iran bad guy, even though Iran's an ally and allowed to be in Syria, which makes no legal sense, but nobody cares, because these are the people you're not supposed to call out. The West, Israel, the UK, France, you're not supposed to call them out. They're the right powers. Whereas the bad guy, China, Russia, and everybody else that's not on the US side, bad guy. Simple as that, right? Go back to sleep. That's all you need. It's very sad. I mean, but here is what is actively being done. And understand, these governments see this. They know this. They're aware it's happening, which means they either don't care or are being essentially coerced into not saying anything. Suspect charged with terrorism offenses over killing of Russian military blogger. This has been happening repeatedly. Remember, we talked about this right in the beginning. I think it was like so many months into this, there was or maybe it was more of like a year into this, we saw the Ukrainian blogger who was assassinated in his car. Why? Because he dared to report the facts on the ground. And the corporate media didn't care. In fact, it was praised by most people that this was a bad guy saying bad things, working with the Russian government, so he's a spy, he's a terrorist. No, he was just a blogger reporting what was going on. They murdered him in his car, assassinated him, and then praised it. Remember the guy that was going to speak out in the legislative branch or the parliament? What is it in the Ukraine? Is it the parliament, or is it just in a government process? He was going to the building and going to make a statement, and they shot him dead in front of the courthouse. Now, one of the locations right now that is actively being ignored, which again, as I've said before, I'm just blown away at how obvious this is. Now, we've just talked about this. Now, I'm glad to see other people kind of talk. Weirdly enough, it seems that this is only kind of resurfacing in like the last couple of days. We talked about this on the 31st. CDC teams studying East Palestine got sick. This was a month after they said everything was fine. Why is that not the biggest story? I mean, that should have been everywhere, but it wasn't, because they knew what it showed. So these people in CNN or Fox News didn't seem to care, didn't seem to make it clear to you, because they have their marching orders, guys. The uniparty. But as I said, the EPA tests just said that there was no risk, right? And that you're safe, CDC. So based on your demeanor with COVID, we should all just assume that the illness was just in your head, right? Obviously, I'm being facetious. So you get 7 people that come down with all kinds of the same exact symptoms of the people in East Palestine. Interestingly, the same symptoms that are supposed to happen after the illness, after the chemicals they come in contact with. But my point is, well, the way they deal with the same thing with the injection, right? That we know it can cause this, but when it happens, we dismiss it. Then we're going to call you all crazy then, right? You must all be imagining it. See how stupid that is? I said sort of how you disregard the issues of all the COVID-injected Americans. But this, I just can't believe. I mean, I'll just show it to you. I shared it right there. I just said, great obfuscation. Excuse me, journalism, CNN. Get this. This is the article. CNN team studying East Palestine. Oh, that's weird. I even used the new highlighter and it didn't work. Or it went away. That one's still there. That's pretty strange. Thought I'd corrected it. Well, in any case, I actually know where this one is. I believe we're talking about here. A CDC spokesperson said 7 of the 15 investigators experienced symptoms, including sore throat, headache, cough, nausea, which of course, just coincidentally, are exactly the similar symptoms that residents are having, and also just coincidentally are exactly the symptoms you'd expect when coming in contact with the things they tell you aren't happening there. What a coincidence, right? Okay, well, it says CNN reported that whether exposure to the chemicals or fatigue caused the symptoms is unclear. That's actually what they wrote. So we're going to pretend that 15 people went to the location where we're pretending there's not a problem, despite all the people sick in the town, and that 7 of those 15 people had the exact same symptoms at the same time, and then ask whether we think it makes sense that sore throat, headache, and nausea are what happens when you get fatigued. You realize how insultingly that is? Like, that is, I mean, I can't even think of something. They don't care that they look that stupid. Pretty crazy. But an official familiar with the cases told the outlet that the workers were suspicious that they became ill at the same time and had the same symptoms. But we don't know for sure. It seems unclear whether or not. Just like, I'm not one to assume. I'm not saying we should assume, but to argue into, like, why not just make it about, maybe it was aliens. That's just as likely as the dumb fatigue option that just makes no sense at all, just like aliens. But why not? The investigators were taking a house-to-house survey. So not only were they ill, which means they were contaminated, but then they went and proceeded to go house to house infecting everybody else too. Rock and roll. The agency spokesperson said that the symptoms resolved for most of the team members later in the afternoon. Okay. So one more point to add to the idiocy of the I believe I said CNN. This is The Hill. There's another CNN point that I'm going to get into. Regardless. Oh no, it was CNN that says this. CNN reported. So I'll take it back. But there's also another CNN report, shocking, that makes them look stupid. We'll get to it in a second. But so add to this, not only do they go, we're not sure it could be fatigue, but how often when you're fatigued, which, means you've worked all day and you're tired, how often do you then go home and then get rid of the fatigue at the end of the day? Right. So they haven't rested, right? They're sick. They're home. They go home and then at the end of the night, they feel better. That's fatigue though, right? You go home and you haven't rested yet, but suddenly you feel better. No. It says that all the workers were able to continue their work within 24 hours. They said the affected members have not reported any lingering health issues. Well, we'll ask them in a couple of years and see if they have cancer. The spokesperson said the survey collection process will conclude Friday, and the staff will analyze the data and provide it to Ohio and Pennsylvania state health officials. Well, great. Well, I guess we'll wait another month and hope everything's okay. Good thing this was being done in the beginning? No. Good thing that we had to force this out of the government's groups that were supposed to be protecting you. A few weeks ago? And still it hasn't even come to pass. We don't even know what's going on yet. Still. I think that was it. Going on to say I think that was basically it. I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything. So next one. I don't know why we don't see more of this. This is from yesterday. Why are we just finding out the CDC officials fell ill while investigating East Palestine derailment? Every one of these examples shows you the real issue here, guys. Why? Because they didn't want you to know. Because they just hoped you wouldn't find out. Why would they do that? Because they're covering something up. They're hiding something. Or because they just don't want you to know that people are sick so they can scoot away from the problem. So they can not be accountable. Whether it's Norfolk or EPA or one of the other captured agencies. They withhold information and they lie to you. Here's what it says. Oh, and just always also point out, this is from Town Hall, April 3rd, right? I'm going to show you that everybody everywhere, other states, everything, which you already know, are still very aware that dioxins are a problem in all of this, right? That doing what they did, and even they put the quote controlled in quotes because it wasn't controlled, that can release dioxins. Not can, it did for sure. So think about how amazing it is that we're still very obviously aware that this is a problem, and EPA, as far as I can tell, is still not even actually testing these things. They've already sent all sorts of shipments that they didn't test that I can prove were sent before they even said they were going to begin testing. And I'm going to show you why, again, that I'm certain about this. At least in one part of it, on why I think that they are either pretending they didn't test when they did or just never have. It says, but now, weeks later, the CDC is admitting that, quote, multiple investigators in East Palestine, Ohio, fell ill while studying possible health impacts from the train derailment. I believe this was in the first week of March. And we didn't find this out until the end of March, the 31st. More than almost a month goes by, and they didn't tell people that were actively being told by the EPA that there was not a problem, that the CDC got sick while they were there. That's a crime. That is literally, they are right now we talked with Brian Festa about the EPA lawsuit. That's the primary focus of the point, is that they knowingly withheld information that put you at risk. They can go to jail for that. And they don't care. So that is another example. Hopefully Brian Festa includes this in what they're doing. It says raising more questions about what the Biden administration and other public health officials knew and how they decided what to tell residents and when. So at the very least, they withheld information. It says on March 6th, 7 members of a 15-person crew conducting assessment of chemical exposure surveys at East Palestine reported symptoms. Everything we just told you, coughing, nausea, and so on. According to the federal health agency, these symptoms are consistent with what residents and other first responders have described. Imagine a situation where you have most of the town suffering the same symptoms. You got first responders who suffered the same symptoms. All those symptoms match up with the chemicals that are supposed to be there. Then you get the CDC who have the same symptoms, and you still go, well, maybe it was fatigue. Maybe we don't know for sure. How do we even exist? We live in a cartoon, as Steve likes to say. How is this real? How is it that obvious, and yet we're still debating this? ABC News was careful to note in its report that it is unclear if the investigator's symptoms came from the toxic chemicals that had been released in the environment. Seriously? But it comes after government officials and Norfolk Southern representatives repeatedly guaranteed the air and drinking water was safe. There you go. So they lied. Everyone is getting sick, and they're just gaslighting you. So Biden doesn't care. Trump's not speaking up, not like he has an obligation to at this point. My point is, left, right, nobody. No one's saying anything. Because that's how this works. But quick, let's point at a Chinese balloon. Let's attack every group, one person in a single group as one thing, because they want us fighting each other. Meanwhile, you're all being poisoned. And I mean that. Not just in Ohio, guys. This is everywhere. Let's not forget, on March 17th, even The Guardian came out and said levels of these chemicals are above safe limits. And yet, apparently nothing mattered. It just kept going forward. We already showed you this. All of a sudden, they all seem to care, right? PFAS has been a problem for decades. And then suddenly, after this one event where we all start pointing at it, everyone comes out and cares. Today, the Today Show, exposure to PFAS can reduce women's fertility by 40%. What are we doing about it? Well, guess what? We've known that for 20 years. Why now do you care? Interesting how they all suddenly care about this long ignored problem. Ask why then the EPA, despite them all clearly knowing about this, ask why they weren't testing then for either PFAS or dioxins when they've started shipping the soil. Right? I think it's pretty clear that they're going, yeah, it's been there forever. It's a problem. Here's a CNN. We've been drinking dangerous chemicals for far too long. Okay, the point is clear. They know that it was there. They've known this has been a kind of ubiquitous background problem. So again, why then did they not test it? So that means they chose to keep that because they didn't want to have to deal with it. So this speaks to a much bigger problem that apparently got focused on because of their either this mistake or plan or whatever you think it was. But suddenly we're going, what about all the stuff that was already there? What about this huge problem? What about benzene and PFAS and dioxin and all this stuff that seems to have been there for 20 years that you seem to have written about, talked about, obfuscated? Well, they don't want to test because then how do they deal with a thing they don't want to deal with? Here's what I said about the CNN Post. Suddenly they care about PFAS or dioxins. Well, only after Norfolk's disaster, when the average person started to take notice of the deadly level of background contamination that was already there. Here's an interesting point. This is from April 3rd. Researchers give update on findings in testing samples in East Palestine. River Valley Organization held a virtual meeting, virtual, of course, because, they don't want to go to the sickly, deadly town, to provide an update on the research being done in East Palestine following the train derailment. In Sunday's research update, Andrew Welton from Purdue University says his team has made 4 trips to East Palestine. They've collected hundreds of samples on wells, house water, creeks, and soil. Well, if you're thinking this is going to end with some kind of there's nothing. Giving updates on the findings, that's just bad titling. That's not what happens here. Like, this is what's crazy to me. It says the teams is helping people answer 4 questions. What chemicals should we be looking for? Where did the chemicals go? How do you return infrastructure or homes to safe use? What are the chemical exposures? What's mind-blowing is that this is what should have been done by EPA and the government and the CD, everybody else, February 4th. But no. They told you were fine. They let the company that did it cover everything up, literally cover it up, which they then had to dig back up after they let the train run over it. That's a real story. And then this independent group is the one coming in trying to explain things to you. Pretty clear. Not Norfolk, not the government. Then it says they are screening for a variety of different compounds. Water pH, volatile organic compounds, the broad general VOC, semi-volatile organic compounds. PFAS is one of them. Total petroleum, heavy metals, and ions. Well, weird. Apparently, just like we told you, they're still not testing for dioxins. How is that possible when seemingly everybody knows that's at least one of the things that should be a problem or could be a problem? Everybody, all the independents, every group testing who has found them there, but they're not doing it still. I believe there's an obvious reason why. Now, PFAS is interesting to me because I do think that is I think maybe they want us to focus on just the PFAS discussion. That's why all these articles are suddenly coming out going, these things are there. We now suddenly care. But don't look at the dioxins. How is that possible? My voice went too high right there. How is that possible? How is that not a cover-up? So anyway, so they test for these things. They are not the government, apparently. But realize if they're testing for PFAS now, well, that means, again, that they were shipping these things before doing so. Why would they even do that? How is that anything but dishonest? Welton says in order to calculate health risks from exposure, agencies should be testing for the same chemicals, which we know that they're not, which is by design, guys. Agencies were not actually aligning what they were testing for. How do you explain that? Even though they were under a unified command. You see, that's a choice, guys. That's a way to hide what's happening. We encourage them to start testing for things across the board. We hope they'll move in that direction. Yeah, let's give them another 3 months and maybe they'll start doing the right thing. Sure glad they care. Norfolk Southern has not made any testing data publicly available. How is that possible? April 4th, right? We're talking 2 months, and they have not even given them, there's zero publicly available information about what their tests have found. What do you think that means? Quote, it's unclear exactly what Norfolk Southern is looking for. If they found the same list, if they're looking for other chemicals, they don't know. He wants to know where the plume of chemicals traveled. Think about that. They don't even know the actual mapping direction of where this plume actually went because they're not being told. 2 months. What, doesn't that matter to the other areas? People in Pennsylvania, don't they want to know if it actually went in their direction or something else? Or they just are, people are being allowed to suffer, guys. Not just in Ohio. Anywhere this is a problem, people are just being allowed to suffer because if they just keep it going and we keep pointing at balloons and everything else, people are already forgetting. Quote, we need an atmospheric model to show where the plume went, where the material's deposited. You'd think it would have been done right away, right? No, because they don't want to know. From there, you can overlay with that geography and find out, is that within the 20-mile radius? God forbid we should want more information, right? He says because that has not been released, which is mind-blowing. He isn't sure how soil testing plans are being made, which probably means they're not. But we're all conspiracy theorists. Let's just not care. Flint, Michigan, all over again. Here is a report from April 3rd, connecting the East Palestine derailment to the Yow watershed. It's Pennsylvania. Mountain Watershed Association has received many inquiries from residents in the area, worried about the impacts. It says there may be long-term issues associated with the derailment affecting our watershed, including acid rain and the toxic waste collected and removed from the site. Great. So apparently Pennsylvania's going, yeah, we're, possibly having problems. But over here in Ohio where it happened, they're going, you're fine. Shut up. Nothing's wrong. But totally, we're all conspiracy theorists. Nothing's happening, right? Additional requests came in for independent testing local to the disaster for toxic chemicals, including dioxins. So Pennsylvania's clearly aware that people know about that, but apparently the EPA is, we're not sure. We're baffled. We're still wondering what's going on. The local nonprofits and residents of East Palestine have succeeded in acquiring coverage for relocation costs, cleaning, and testing for dioxins by the EPA. But all these steps were hard fought, which is unbelievable that they have to fight for the things that were obvious from the beginning and then realize that even though they've been told that's going to happen, as far as we can tell, they're still not testing for those things. They're just hoping you just get quiet and forget. April 3rd, Ohio's U.S. senators want NIH to step in. That's great. Let's get Dr. Fauci's team in there. U.S. senators from Ohio and Pennsylvania want the NIH to probe how chemicals spilled and affecting the residents. Now, maybe that's a good thing, or maybe this is exactly the plan. This, for some reason, kind of creeped me out. Quote, to help assess and mobilize existing assets and resources to respond to the community's biomedical research needs. No thanks. Just the last thing we need is these kind of people involved testing and, using this to their benefit. Who knows? Now, yes, I am jaded, guys. I'm not going to say that's the only thing that comes out of it. I don't know, but I don't trust what comes out of these entities. Nobody should at this point. When burned, these chemicals never go away, says Misty Allison speaking to the committee, which she's right. Chemicals such as dioxins, which are not safe at any level and cause damage that may not show up for years. 2 days later, our government told us it was safe to come home. We right now know that's not true, right? 2 days later, they said, yeah, come on back. But is it safe? People and animals in my community are sick. The EPA tells us the data is fine. Well, independent researchers say that there are high levels of carcinogens all around us. Who do we trust? You trust the independent experts, guys. It's quite obvious who has a reason to lie to you. And yet the government doesn't care. Here is a really interesting one. Now, this is coming from China Dialogue. I'm not even familiar with the platform. But the point in this is the thing that they said in the beginning that apparently it takes outside groups to point out. April 4th. In China, a large number of political news outlets and scientific media reported on the incident, triggering extensive public discussion. The prevailing view is that the incident was so severe and damaging as to be the American Chernobyl. Now, here, interesting point to make. Now, is that true? I don't know. That could be China wanting to say that. It could be the truth. I do think it's some level of the truth. I think this is one of the biggest environmental disasters I've ever seen. But it's interesting that I can almost promise you that there are Republican people on the right side of this that when getting the idea that China is promoting that it happened, will suddenly say it's fake because China is pushing it. Like, I can almost guarantee that's where a lot of that's coming from, that it's only about this. They're hiding the whole thing and they're lying. We should question everything. Be open to all possibilities, but demand evidence, facts. Don't just assume into what the government says or one party is arguing, left-right paradigm. Most public opinion is concerned about the pollution that may be caused by the burning of hazardous chemicals like vinyl chloride, especially phosgene in the short term and possibly dioxins in the long term. Everybody knows, but nobody in the EPA wants to test for it. So far, none has found concentrations of pollutants such as dioxins to be higher than the environmental background value. That is the crux of the point. We've already made this point, but I want to reiterate this. What they're telling you guys, remember, they let this out of the bag a while ago when they said, well, we don't know what to compare it to. What do you mean you know what to compare it to? We already know what the dangerous level is. What they were really admitting is that we already know there's a level of dioxins that are already there that you're not supposed to know about. So we don't know what to do. We can't test and then tell you it's dangerous because we know we don't think that's from this train, or it might not be. So we don't want to just test and then you'll think it's from the train. They admitted this without saying it. And now the ultimate reality is what they did find. They're now going, it's okay, though it wasn't worse than what was already there. If they knew this, which they did, the same point, explain for me why they weren't telling you that in the beginning or testing for it while shipping this across state lines. Because they were trying to hide the truth. The reality is that what they've already been doing and allowed this far, the EPA included, has been poisoning you this whole time. This only made it worse. But now they don't know how to make this situation. They don't know how to, if there's already a dangerous level and this made it worse, when they test for it and find that high level, one of them are going to be, so that's not fair. That was already there. Well, they can't admit that though, because it reveals they knew and hid it from you. See, they're in this weird circle of trying to cover up everything. And right now they're trying to hope you just give up and stop paying attention. The problem is it's already there and you've already been poisoned. And that on glyphosate and aluminum and fluoride and everything else being dumped on you right now that is very clearly continually building. Many of these are bioaccumulative, like dioxins, bioaccumulate. They build up in your fat, they build up in the food supply, and they don't go away. Now, guess what's going to happen in this central area of the production of this country? I think that was it for the most part. Oh, here we go. Last couple parts. It says, in early March, the EPA told the media it had instructed the railroad company, as the responsible party, to begin monitoring for dioxins. So more than a month after, even though we can prove, not just from the statements, but from their own documents, that you knew there was already a problem, as well as PFAS, but they didn't even tell the company responsible to even begin testing, which they still haven't done, by the way, until more than a month afterward. Like right in that moment, if this was an honest government, they would have been held accountable for that. Somebody. Nobody was even criticized for that. Of particular concern to the agency has been the question of whether the cleanup process could cause secondary pollution. See, again, it's a guaranteed reality. If you didn't even test and know what you were shipping, well, that already happened. Then, when you pretend you're caring about the testing and you realize you've already sent it to multiple locations that don't have incinerators, which I've proven on this show, which the experts, including the EPA, make clear is the only way to deal with dioxins or PFAS, then you're admitting that you knowingly sent it to places that couldn't deal with it, which then guarantees it will be passed along. I've done 2 different shows on this, guys. It's easy to prove. In the initial period following the accident, phosgene and dioxins were the dangers most commonly discussed, and yet they still tried to hide from it. Rather than monitoring and dealing with dioxins from day one, the EPA made the monitoring of compounds that could easily lead to acute poisoning and death, such as phosgene, its first priority, followed by water pollutants, and lastly, persistent organic pollutants capable of remaining in the soil and groundwater for a long time. Does that seem a little bit backward? Or at the very least, it should have been all of them together? Because the reality is, yes, those are more acutely immediate risks matter a little bit more, I guess, in the moment. But the idea that you allowed this to be shipped across other state lines, which clearly other governors are aware of because they're all stopping it, Ohio, or rather Oklahoma, and the rest are just going, no. To the point of potentially breaking the law. They're going, we don't want that. They know, I believe. But the point is they let that continue. The arrangement was also predicated on the characteristics of the pollutants and how long they would continue to have an effect. This is from Engineering and Technology from the 4th. Investment giant under fire over Ohio chemical disaster. Again, just making the clear point that April 4th, everybody everywhere seems to be acknowledging that, yes, what happened here was not controlled. They made a bad decision to incinerate something when they didn't need to burn, and which caused the most concern was, it says, the burning of the vinyl chloride. Green groups and scientists fear that the uncontrolled incineration, you realize that CNN and all the rest of them are still saying controlled burn? Think how pathetic they are. They are just mindlessly towing the line. The uncontrolled incineration of the chemical may have led to the formation of dioxins. I'm just trying to make that clear, guys. And the point is, yes, we do know they're bioaccumulative, and they do build up in the food chain, experts say. Now, one of the main points I wanted to include today to finish is just the fact that after all of it, the fact that they're still disputing that there's even a problem, you are literally finding people in the town who are testing positive for vinyl chloride in their urine. Now realize, I'm willing to bet you that they're not testing for dioxins in their urine. How much you want to bet that would also be present? As well as PFAS and whatever else is going on there that probably have nothing to do with the train wreck. But the point is, this does. And benzene. Right? Now ask yourself how that even makes sense. So that if vinyl chloride was burned off and it does dissipate, that seems to suggest to me that it is in the water supply, that it is in something that's continually present. Because if it was just in the air, it would eventually dissipate. It's not like dioxins, which will be present. Vinyl chloride would eventually, like, remember, it boils at very low temperatures. So if it's out in the atmosphere, it boils off and evaporates rather quickly. And the point is that it would dissipate. So we're talking 2 months later, and she's testing positive for vinyl chloride and benzene in her urine. Shelby Walker, one of those residents, and one of the residents who are looking for testing. And she recently got tested at a medical lab, not the EPA, mind you, not Norfolk Southern, but of her own accord, because that's how this is working. Even though, by the way, most of these testing locations are now suddenly not allowing these testing. Feeling ill since the derailment 2 months ago. She's still feeling sick. She is scared after the benzene and vinyl chloride were detected in her urine. Because that's a big deal, guys. That is a lasting problem. Vinyl chloride is nothing to dismiss. And we're talking cancerous problems here, especially if it's literally so clear that it's in her urine. It says, quote, "Are my kids going to have to watch something I don't want them to watch with me and my health?" Think about what she's worried about. She's worried about her getting sick and dying and her kids having to worry about it. Walker and her family of 11 live 900 feet from the controlled burn site. Sad. She said she will never be able to safely live in her home again. Quote, "We are still in and out a lot because she has pets. There are nights that my husband and I are still staying at home while my older daughter has the kids and grandkids at the hotel." So they clearly know, and they just can't always make these choices. It says it just depends on if there's availability. That's not choice. They're forced to deal with this, to accept the problem because they can't afford anything else. But you listen to CNN and Fox about Norfolk, they're taking care of everybody. Don't worry. We're going to make it right. We're going to make it right. Clearly not.
Thanks again for tuning into the Independent Review. See you all next week.
Feel free to keep your mask on. Put your masks on.
The 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Mr. Stupid.
The Premier walking maskless seconds before saying,
I think all of us know people in our lives who are not necessarily following these rules.
Victoria Police has issued 2 infringement notices to Premier Daniel Andrews.
I've been wearing a mask the entire game long. People want a picture, I hold my breath. Zero risk.